Ladies and gentlemen, grab your pen and paper and write down 3 things you're grateful for. This is OD on Life. Come get high with us.
Hi everybody, welcome to OD on Life. Today I am with Rachael Woldoff, who is a professor of sociology at West Virginia University. And as you know, if you've listened before, the goal of each episode is to not only be entertaining and fun and interesting, but to give you at least one gem that you can walk away with that will actually empower you, something that can lead to action so that you can improve your life. So you've probably heard it said before that knowledge is power. I think it's a little different than that. I think that knowledge is interesting, but applied knowledge is power. So that's the idea of this show. And today I think is going to be really interesting. I talked to Rachael, about a month ago or so, and I think we both expected that to be maybe a 45-minute conversation, but it ended up being, over 4 hours, if I remember right. Is that right?
Yeah, it was actually over 5 hours.
Wow, okay. I remember thinking that I'm almost 100% sure that's actually the longest Skype conversation I've ever had.
Me too.
And it felt easy. So I thought, wow, I have to talk to you for my podcast.
Yeah, and it was a gold mine because at the time, my husband is my co-author on this project I'm working on, and he was like, he was like, wait, how long is that interview? And I said it was really long, and he's like, well, but he's not in the location that we're studying. And I said, you'll see. And I mean, it was a gold mine. There are so many gems of
great,
knowledge that we got from that.
Good.
About failure and about rising from that, and about a lot of things about lifestyle issues that I think people here maybe take for granted. So It was very eye-opening for us. Yeah.
I'm happy to hear that. It was interesting for me too. Haven't really, other than when I was briefly in university myself, I haven't really talked to a lot of professors. So it was interesting for me to hear your perspective on things. We talked about the academic world and how it works, and you've written several books and how that works, and it's really interesting to me. So.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good.
Yeah. Oh, and actually, I forgot that in your intro. If my research online is correct, you've written 3 books, and I have them down here somewhere. I remember one was Black Flight, White Flight, which
the first one was called High Stakes, and that was about public funding of stadiums and arenas in Columbus, Ohio. And then the second one was called White Flight, Black Flight, and that one is about neighborhood change and what happens after white people leave a neighborhood and black people move in. So usually you hear about like this sort of common narrative, like, okay, black people move in and then all the whites leave and that's the end of it. But I interviewed people after that happens to learn about their relationships. And then the last book just came out in March. That one is called Priced Out, and that's about the loss of middle-class housing in New York City using a case study of Stuyvesant Town, which is the largest real estate deal in U.S. history.
Wow.
Residential real estate deal in U.S. history of a very, very large apartment complex that went into that was sold and then defaulted, and massive changes in who lives there and how the neighborhood changed.
Wow. Yep. Do you happen to remember about how many apartment units that place was?
Let me see. Hold on. It was in the tens of thousands.
Wow. So it was the size of a small city then, if it's.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yes. This is an iconic. It's like 80 acres.
Yeah.
I want to say it's like, I have to think about that for a minute or look it up, but
that's a good enough guesstimate. I was just thinking, like, I've seen examples. I used to be in real estate business, and I dealt with apartments and things, and I've seen what can happen when one like 20 or 50 unit apartment building goes into foreclosure and nobody's watching it, and there's people squatting and jumping in the windows, and there's needles on the floor.
The thing is, so this was like, so I have the number now. It's 11,250 apartments.
Okay. Wow.
And the thing is, because the real estate is so desirable, they had, they have the people who live there, and the people who live there are middle class, and many of them have lived there a long time. They had a firm managing it in the meantime while it was in,
Yeah.
sort of in between owners. So it wasn't like what you might imagine, like after the crisis, where there's vacant property or like an individual homeowner, or even like a Section 8, or what we call like a
Yep.
low income housing. This is like prime real estate. I mean, it's right by the Lower East Side. So it's between, if you, I don't know if you're familiar with New York, but it's in New York City, it's from First Avenue to Avenue C, between 14th and 23rd. So it's very big. It's 80 acres. And the thing that's really cool about it, it's got playgrounds and parkland. So it really doesn't feel like you're in New York. It's like a little oasis in the city. So it's a very important place. And so when that happened, basically it's about converting it from middle class housing to market rate, more luxury housing.
Interesting.
And what happens if everyone in New York can only be in luxury housing is that all the regular people don't live there anymore.
Yeah.
And so the city loses its character as a place for creative people.
Right.
You
hear about that in other places too. Like, and I just hear bits and pieces, but it sounds like Austin is going through something a little bit similar. I mean, probably not anywhere near the prices, but, and San Francisco did the same thing. It was kind of.
Yeah, it's called gentrification.
Right.
Yeah, and sometimes it's the negatives about it are sometimes overstated. But in general, yes, when like a sort of often middle class white and upper middle class white group comes in, they want to be, in the city, like Seattle is having this problem right now. And then what happens is a lot of times the minorities and lower income people are then displaced or priced out of the main neighborhood.
Right.
So they're not really getting the benefits as much of the city as the new people who are coming in. So just as the city is getting good, they don't have a space in the city anymore. That's the argument. At least that's the argument. It doesn't always, by the way, that's way oversimplification. It doesn't always play out like that.
Yeah.
Because it depends on the pacing, and it depends on the percentage of the minority population that was there and how well they were doing in that city. And those things vary by place.
I've got all these different topics written down to talk to you about. We could start with really any of them.
Okay.
But this one, what we're talking about now, kind of leads into sort of the opposite type of situation where I wanted to ask you, it seems like you've studied people who were in a neighborhood that they weren't happy with, and, whether it's crime or poverty or whatever the problems are. And so some people decide to leave. And the thing I'm curious about is you hear people sometimes talk about how they can't get out of their neighborhood, that they're stuck, that they're sort of like a victim of circumstance and a victim of their, whatever, their friends, their neighborhood. What do you have to say about it? I'm curious what you've learned about that.
Well, so this is like one of the big research areas in urban sociology, is this issue of, so most, the average person, and this is one of the hardest parts of being a sociology teacher also, the US is a very individualistic place where everyone believes that we're a meritocracy and you pick yourself up by your bootstraps and all of that. And I think there's a little bit of that in the digital nomad world as well, by the way, but
Yeah.
And all entrepreneurs probably feel that to some degree. But the reality of it is, like, when you're looking at people's housing situation and where they live and their life chances, there are two forces at work. It's like, on one hand, there's structure, which is, you're born into the household you were born into, you're born into the neighborhood you were born into, you're born into all kinds of circumstances that are beyond your control. You could be born in Chiang Mai or you could be born in the United States. It's and then so when we talk about those things, we talk about structure such as affordability. I mean, clearly, some people can afford nicer or, higher income or lower crime areas or areas with better schools. I, for instance, live in one of it is the best school district in Pennsylvania in the US. And I know other people that can't afford to live where I live. Okay, so affordability is a real thing, right? Then there are historical factors like segregation, Jim Crow laws, redlining. Redlining is when real estate companies, banks, insurance companies would map out areas that were minority and not give them loans. And that still goes on. There's something called steering, where Black homeowners look for houses and real estate agents give them a list of houses different from what they would give me. They would give them a
Right.
list of houses closer to Black areas with more Black people in them, closer to the city. And honestly, the person searching for the house doesn't even know what's going on
Yep.
because they don't know what I'm getting. They don't know what list I'm getting. And we know this goes on because they do audits now. So you can see what lists different ethnic groups are given. For instance, Latinos who have an accent are given a different list than Latinos who don't. On average, and these are averages.
Yeah.
Nationally.
I actually, not to interrupt you, but I remember
No, go
when
ahead.
I was studying for my real estate license, going through the class, they talked about all these terms and basically don't do it, you'll get sued. These are all illegal now. And of course, that doesn't mean it doesn't ever happen.
Right.
But it was interesting. And you know how the pendulum swings, of course. There's this huge list of words that you can't use when you're marketing a real estate property. And
Right.
some of it is totally, obvious and valid. Like you can't say, this is a white neighborhood. Like, don't say
Right.
that. But then there are other things like people like to use the word executive a lot to make a house seem like expensive and, whatever. But that word was on the list, and some of the words that are on the list just don't seem like they belong. So one of my coworkers actually made a fake flyer for a house that didn't exist and used all the most mild words that you're not allowed to use, just to,
Right.
because it's that whole pendulum swinging and that maybe an overreaction. With good intent, of course, but
Or sometimes it can be deceptive. I've talked to people in the real estate industry and, I'll sometimes I'm not posing, but I'll say, oh, when I was doing my second book, White Flight, Black Flight, I would ask, oh, so how's the school district in this area? And that's all available. You can look at, for instance, I knew the percentage of people who were getting a reduced and free lunch. I knew the racial distribution, and I knew the test scores. And they would just say, oh, it's good. And I'm
Yeah.
like, no, it's not. You know what I mean? And that in itself is deceptive.
yeah.
But of course, I guess they're not allowed to talk about that. I think they're allowed to say it's a good school district, but when it's not good, and I guess if they want to make a sale, they don't want to tell you, the facts of
Right.
how it is.
That's where my mind went too, because in reality, in the business, people know there are a few things that can actually get them in trouble, but it's obviously you can't have like some officer from housing and urban development following each agent around every time they talk to somebody. It's hard to
Right.
control. But
Yeah, and that's but the point of that is like the block busting, the realtors who try to oh, there are Black people moving in, everyone move out,
Yeah.
So these kinds of things do still go on. And even if you don't think they go on as much as they once did, it doesn't really matter because the historical effect of those things, we call that like a cultural lag, it lingers. And
Yeah.
so those things they still affect the structure of the city and and what is now has a reputation as a Black neighborhood or what has a reputation as a poor neighborhood or a dangerous neighborhood. So those things, historical things, are part of the social structure. And so the affordability is one thing. And then but then on the other side of things, people also want to, and then of course, these are all forms of discrimination, which obviously still go on. I'm sure if you talk to anyone who's African American, if it's, first of all, it goes on, but they assume it goes on and they anticipate it. In my study, tons of African Americans who I interviewed, when they look for houses, they wear a suit.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, wow. I would never think to wear a suit, and that's my entitlement,
Right.
to be treated fairly. But they're very concerned with showing that they're professional, and they're anticipating that people think they're poor or have bad credit, and that they're not respectable and things like that. And so discrimination is another part of all of it, But then on the other side of things, and this is the thing that I think, this is the side of things that I think the general public overstates and that academics understate. There is the issue of choice, and people make choices about where they live, and there are trade-offs about where they live. And there's been lots of research that's sort of tried to get at, it's very hard to capture this, but try to look at people's preferences about where they want to live. And part of that is racial composition. And it's a very touchy subject, and it's something no one wants to even discuss, really. It's really hard. I'm looking forward to the Digital Nomad Project I can talk to with people, because when I talk about my other research, a lot of times people are like, get away from me.
Uh,
They don't want to talk
right.
about that subject. Or they think, they're very reductive. Like they'll say things like, I remember when I was in grad school, I was planning my wedding, and the guy who like I was buying candy from for the wedding, he's like, so what's your dissertation on? And I said, oh, well, I'm looking at how people's wealth holdings translate into the kinds of neighborhoods they live in. And I had like data on Black, Latino, and white wealth asset holdings, and then where they end up living. And not surprisingly, Blacks, whites, and Latinos with the exact same asset holdings, not income, but like their wealth, live in very different communities. And he's like, oh, well, that's just because they all want to live with each other. And I was like, it's really not that simple, but okay,
Yeah, I think it's important to talk. I mean, anytime you can't have a conversation about something,
Yeah.
you're not going to move forward. And I don't know.
Yeah.
It's this kind of this overly PC culture.
Yeah.
Even if some of it comes from like it's like well intended,
Right.
the end result is probably not going to be the best. And you hear all this stuff lately about trigger warnings and like campuses being safe spaces and things. It's like, no, we need to, the toughest issues are the ones that need to be talked about.
Yeah.
Those
And
are the
it's
most
really
important.
hard. It's like when you're teaching the classes I teach, I mean, we almost always talk about race, crime, and neighborhoods. That's my, big subject areas. And it's very difficult in class. And I warn them. I'm like,
Yeah.
this is not a place where I'm going to say whites and blacks have the same chance of committing crime. Like, no. That's not true. Or violent crime is just as prevalent in both groups.
Yeah.
And if it's not, it's just because the statistics are made up. No, it's not true. But the main thing is to understand the reasons for racial discrepancies are not tied to like biological inferiority and things like that. And they're not just tied to free will and laziness. They're tied to major structural differences
Yeah.
in the histories of different groups. And honestly, it's mostly residential. It's where people live. I mean, crime in the U.S. is so much about your neighborhood.
Yeah, definitely.
And people don't realize that. They think poor white people and poor black people have the same experiences in the U.S. and they don't.
I grew up, I don't know if I told you this when we talked before, but I grew up on an Indian reservation.
Yeah, you said that.
Yeah, so I was the minority, and honestly, I was for some of my life a little bit bitter about things like affirmative action because I said, wait a second, where's my scholarship? I grew up on an Indian reservation, and I had, people throwing my BMX bike off a dock because I was white,
Right.
And I'm going, there was actually an interesting conversation. I can't remember. It was in a Facebook group here in Chiang Mai. I think it was the Digital Nomad Facebook group. Somehow it got into talking about race, and then it got into slavery somehow. And it was so interesting to see people's different perspectives because these people in the debate were from all over the world. And there were a couple Americans in there, and it was pretty evident that they thought slavery only happened to black people in America. And a bunch of Asian people were in there going, what are you talking about? Like the Egyptians had slaves, and the Chinese had slaves, and white people were slaves of, yeah, like there were white people that were the slaves of black people in Africa, like, yeah, it's not a new thing or just an American thing, but yeah, if you can't even talk about it, then you don't learn these things.
Yeah, and to understand, I think affirmative action is very difficult because of the way I see it happen all the time at work, because, we'll see, for instance, when we're hiring,
Yeah.
and you'll see these liberal sociologists. My department until this year was I think it was all white. And they think that like a meritocracy will diversify the department, but it never does, because if you're only looking at like really stringent measures such as like who has the most publications, it's pretty much, there's always going to be, it's very rare you're going to find an African American who has the most publications in a pool of 80 applicants. And so if you want to diversify the department, you have to have a goal to diversify the department and that you believe in. And then you have to have a way to do that goes beyond counting publications. And so, I made the case that like we didn't really have a goal of doing that. And then this year we did hire someone African American, but I mean, if it had been a regular search, she wouldn't have had the most publications, but that's not the goal. The goal is that we have Black students at the university that can't just have all white teachers. That's not good for anybody at the school, you know? That's not giving them an education to deprive them. I mean, that's a safe space, is having Black faculty there. I mean, as much as I study these things, I'm not African American. I mean, so mentoring and all that kind of stuff, you know, it's really important to have a cross section of people in academia. I actually just said this the other day. So actually, I posted something on Facebook today. Someone said, I just met my first Donald Trump supporter. And I was like, this is the problem with academia. I mean, it's like, how could you not know anyone that supports Donald Trump? I mean, that just shows that you're cut off from the mainstream. Like that's, you know, I live in a community where tons of people support Donald Trump. That's why I understand, you know, that's why people don't listen to us because we don't know anyone like them, you know? So I really try to, even though I don't agree with a lot of things, because a lot of my students want to be cops, you know, I'm in criminology and sociology. I don't agree with a lot of them on a lot of issues, but I try to just, you know, understand where they're coming from and try to help them see the research that is counter to some of their deeply held belief systems, many of which they've honestly just inherited from their culture and from their parents, you know.
Well, and that, you know, I've got one of the topics I wrote down here is just open-minded. That's all I wrote. And I think, you know, that confirmation bias that people talk about, like if you want to be, you know, if you grew up with a certain belief that maybe your parents or your neighborhood helped give to you, then you're going to kind of seek out evidence that that's correct. And you're going to try to find faults in things that make the opposite point. But I actually looked just before we talked, and I was listening to something. They were talking about a word, and I thought it was a Hebrew word, but it must not have been because I couldn't find it. But there was a word that was like the closest thing to debate in some language. It was their word for debate. But you know how you hear about like the Japanese word for crisis is like opportunity and something else put together, like a word that we would think of like crisis, but it also has opportunity in it. And again, you know, I think it's Japanese. I didn't confirm that, but there's a word in some language that is their closest word for debate. And it means to, like, more in English, it would mean like to discuss and come closer together, you know? So instead of trying to be right, which is what I tend to see in debate, you know, you like the actual debate clubs where they talk as fast as they possibly can and just try to do everything they can to be right, versus you
like
listen to me, I listen to you. Like what?
Like lawyers.
Yeah, right.
They just like, people always say to me like, well, how come, you know, you don't want to be a lawyer? But I mean, I'm not really interested. I mean, I'm not really interested in like winning arguments with people. I'm kind of beyond that. Like my friends that love dating guys where they have these debates and everything, I'm like, I don't, you know, that's not anything I'm really interested in. I had an incident come up last semester, for instance. I teach a course on the show The Wire, or I used to teach it, the sociology of The Wire. And one of the things we cover in seasons 3 and 4, they have a lot of excessive force by the police in the show. And as you know, in the United States, the police, in my opinion, and in the opinion of most people, and definitely most Black people, is that the police are in a place right now where they're using excessive force out of fear in a lot of situations that don't call for it. And Black people are dying. And this just happened the other day, for instance, with a motorist that was needing help and he got shot, you know. And so anyway, getting shot, I argue, is even if you don't want to look at those cases as if, let's say, you think the police were entitled to shoot them and they're entitled to be afraid and shoot people, let's say you think that, but that's not, I try to tell the class, like, that's not mostly what excessive force is. Excessive force is like the daily, you know, calling them names, hitting them, slamming them, pushing them, kicking them, punching them. And I mean, I even have colleagues who were police officers who tell me, like, if someone runs, they have to come back with stitches because you have to save face. You know, you can't let them just run and apprehend them. You have to have stitches. Anyway, I assigned a reading in class. It's an academic study that was I thought it was going to be like this great thing. I've used it many, many times, but it exploded last semester. I had the article uses what's called a vignette method, where they present a vignette. So it's a story. In the story, they present it to police officers, and they say, okay, two police officers are chasing someone. They're in pursuit. They catch the guy, and then they tell him to stop, and then he runs. He was a car thief. And then when they catch him, they punch him in the stomach a bunch of times. Is this excessive force, right? And of course, the answer is yes. I mean, yes, it is, just definitionally. But then they look at which kinds of officers demographically say yes and which say no, okay? And the whole point of the study is to understand why the police think it's okay to do this and what kinds of police think it's okay to do this. But in class, what ended up happening was, some of the male kind of police looking people, white, and actually I think one was Latino, they were explaining what the study showed, and then they were empathizing with that perspective, okay? And they were talking about cops they know and why they feel it's okay to do that, and how you get, adrenaline and all that kind of stuff. But then some people in the class, both African-American and a white woman with an African-American boyfriend, kind of went crazy on him in class. And I just couldn't allow that, because the classroom is not, even though I agree with their perspective on how that's outrageous that police feel that way, because they're supposed to be trained professionals, I couldn't allow them to attack him in class. And I think they felt surprised that I was protecting him. But the whole classroom has to be able to talk about the article. And the article, and I think it's important for them to hear why police think it's okay to do this. I mean, that's how we learn, and it was like an ongoing thing for the whole semester, this inability to listen to each other on these issues. And it's because right now it's a very heated topic, and it was very tense. Like, we had to have the dean get involved, and I mean, there were things said in class that were not okay, and it was very difficult, very challenging.
Do you happen to know who Eckhart Tolle is?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
Oprah's guy, yeah.
Yeah. So this is making me think of, basically when people get defensive or angry. I mean, in a situation like you just talked about, or even, anything where they feel like if they are wrong about, wrong on a topic, then that somehow makes them less of a person, and that's just getting your ego intertwined with ideas, right? Like, if you have friends that are a cop, then you must be able to explain why these cops are doing what they're doing, or else that makes your friend a bad person, which makes you a bad person for being friends with this guy. And no. Like, if you can disentangle from all of that, like what you just said, if you can understand why this happens, we have a chance of fixing it, right? And if you just demonize and say, like, cops are all bad people, and if all the people that empathize with the cops just say, well, the people in these neighborhoods are just all violent or whatever, the drug crazed lunatics or whatever those things are that you hear, like, you're not going to make any progress.
Like, just from a logical perspective, what's the point? Remember, I mean, people think it's ironic because people give so much credence to, like, doctors or people in the physical sciences as being so logical and doing real science. But sociology, I mean, so many people are borrowing from what we do now. Public health, all this stuff that's pointing to poverty as a cause of health problems, and now looking at gun violence as a social epidemic. I mean, this is all sociology, and sociologists have some of the best methods, and they were able to uncover from this, if you look at the study, that rookies and managers do think it's excessive force. And that's interesting. That means people who haven't been fully socialized into the culture yet do recognize that that's excessive force. And also people who are administrators, who are going to be held accountable, also recognize that this is not okay. So that's the point of the study. But everyone, and the thing is, I understand these are young people, they're 18 to 22 years old, and it's also, lots going on right now in our culture, and it hits very close to the bone. And I'm sort of, you have two choices as an instructor. You can avoid the topic and just use a textbook, or focus on different aspects of the show that are obvious and less controversial, or you can continue to do the work that you're supposed to be doing, and you just take a risk, and you choose to have things happen in class sometimes that are difficult, but that's why we're there, you
Yeah.
know? And
Right.
it's not easy. I mean, I think it's so much easier for my colleagues who teach like math or something like that. I mean, it's like every semester something is going on that is very, very tied to what I do in class. And it's very polarizing. In that class, there were 25 students, 5 of them were African American. I mean, yes, they take it personally. I mean, it's their lives, you know?
Yeah.
So, I think too, I think a lot of people don't understand the daily lived experiences of African Americans being afraid of being pulled over, and I know the word microaggression may seem really silly, and I agree, but I think it's hard to imagine on a daily basis the amount of indignity that many Black people feel, especially like on a white campus. WVU is in the middle of Appalachia. So it's very difficult for a lot of them to navigate. When they go to class, they're the only one in there that's Black sometimes, and they're far from home, and they come from different kinds of families and have had different experiences with the criminal justice system. So it's very personal for them,
Yeah.
and but that's what makes class great. I mean, they'll be the ones in class to say, I had a student 2 semesters ago, her mother was evicted in the middle of the semester, and she was working full-time at Burger King and sending all her money home. And it's like, yeah, she's in here.
Yeah.
Like, she's in this class, like, deal with it. She is in this class. Like, poor people are all just lazy. Like, her mother was evicted, and she'll talk about it in class. And it makes class. I had a student in class whose father was executed.
Wow.
I mean, I know. It's just amazing. And to me, that's the value of college is, these interactions we have in class where students come forward and tell you about their lived experience. And then I have rich students who charged a cruise on their parents' credit card, and their parents let them go on the cruise, and like,
Oh, you mean without asking?
oh yeah, without
Oh
asking.
my gosh.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, without asking. Yep.
While I'm listening to all this, my mind went to a couple different places. I'll get all sidetracked here, so I'll get to my main point. I listened to a lady back in my hometown in Bellingham, Washington, Linda Giles. She gave a talk. She works with the Red Cross. And I used to have this little group there called Positive Atmosphere. It was a local group. We'd get together every month. So I had her speak. And I don't remember even the general idea of most of what she talked about, but I remember one part where she said, nobody wakes up in the morning thinking, today I'm going to be the crappiest person I can be. She said, everyone is doing the best they can with what they know.
Right.
And I think whether you're talking about people in another city or another neighborhood or another country, that my personal belief is that we have a whole lot more in common than what makes us different. And if we can keep that in mind, we can better empathize and like learn and understand people, because I think it boils down to most people, like your student working at Burger King to help support her family. That's the same thing the guy in Iraq is doing. That's the same thing the person a couple streets over from me in Thailand is doing. They're just trying to raise their family and maybe have a little time to go have some fun once in a while with their friends and, not get killed, not get fired, things like that.
Yeah, but at the same time, in the U.S. right now, like there are so many things that are so polarizing right now. Like 0 Black people basically support Donald Trump. And like, if you even look, like when I was in Bali, I read the book of the Jeffrey Toobin book, The People versus O.J. Simpson, and that's a really important thing to me because I was in college when the Rodney King riots happened in L.A., and then when the O.J. trial happened, I was just starting. It was right before I was starting grad school, and one of the big divisive things in this country is like how differently Black and white people see justice and these issues, which is just completely polarizingly different. And it's important to understand why each group feels the way they do, and as much as we're the same, there are these like very big issues that people feel really differently about. And I think it would be great if the classroom can be a place where we learn to understand why. Like for me, training people who are going to be in law enforcement in my classes, some people say, why would you have to go to college to become a cop? And I always say, I would much rather be arrested by a cop that went through our program who took classes on race and crime and the criminal justice system and poverty and gender and all of these things. So they at least understand the structures that are at work and how those things affect the way they see the world. I mean, we all have biases and prejudices. I mean, that's just cognitively part of our system, and then we're trained into certain mindsets based on our environment and our culture. And I think when people won't acknowledge that, like when people say, I don't see race or I don't see, it's like that's where the problem lies. You need to recognize the way you do it so that you can avoid some of the things that would get you into trouble. And I think that's why I really think it's so beneficial to have like this background in our field, because I think it does sensitize you to the things that you didn't even, I mean, you're talking about awareness. I mean, I think that's what sociology does. It makes you aware of how much of your worldview you were not really conscious of is designed by structures outside of your choosing,
Yeah.
I mean, most people have the same political party as their parents, the same religion as their parents. Why am I not Hindu? Well, I wasn't born in Bali.
Yeah, yeah.
you know, Why
Actually,
am I?
I have a question for you because that's a plane going by. Sorry if that's loud,
Yeah, no.
everybody. It's actually cool enough right now here to have my windows open, which is not normal, so it's great. Uh, so there are these tests, and I can't remember what they're called, but a friend of mine back in Bellingham said that she took one of these tests, and it's made to reveal what your biases are, and about race or about whatever. But the one she took was about race, and she said she grew up in a neighborhood that I think was primarily black, or at least like a large part of the population was black. So she's totally comfortable and she feels like she doesn't have any kind of prejudice or biases against those people. And so she thought she was just going to ace this test. And she took
It's
this,
probably called an implicit association test,
and
where you like, because of social desirability, nobody wants to admit they have these biases,
right.
but it measures your attitudes and beliefs that you're unwilling or unable to bring forth.
And doesn't it have something to do with like the speed that you can separate ideas or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not all the way into this stuff. It's more psychology, but yeah, they show like little slides of people, like the really, really like quick slides of, for instance, black and white people, and then like words like smart, not,
Yeah.
criminal, or, and then how quickly you push the buttons. They think that shows something about your implicit attitudes.
Right. And I'm sorry. So what was the name again? I'm going to write it down.
I think what you're talking about is it's about unconscious bias, right? It's called the
Yeah.
implicit association test.
Okay. I want to go take some of these.
Yeah, I'm not really into that because I actually, I don't know. I'm not really into that, but I know my husband has training in psychology and he definitely believes, he thinks that that's legitimate.
Okay. So do you just not think it works, or you don't want to know what your biases are, or why aren't you into it?
It's not that. It's just that I guess I'm not really interested. I guess maybe it's just not my interest. I'm more
Okay.
interested in the how of the social part of it, and I'm not
Sure.
interested in like I'm not interested. The thing I don't like about psychology sometimes, as experimental psychology, is like the aspect of it that's like playing tricks on people
Hmm.
and enjoying treating people like guinea pigs. I don't like that part of it.
Right.
And I don't find that enjoyable. And like I don't like the gotcha part of it. Um, and I know people who do like that part of it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like one of the reasons people go into it. It makes you feel superior that you've like designed an experiment and tricked people or whatever.
Yeah.
But I
See,
don't.
this friend of mine that took it, she thought that she was going to be totally like the, poster child for like a all-inclusive, non-prejudiced person, but she found out that she had some kind of bias against Asian people, which
Mm.
she didn't expect. It was a surprise to her. That's why she was telling me about it. And so
Was it like a model minority thing where she thought they were like good at math and stuff like
I can't
that?
remember what she thought about them, but she definitely had. I don't remember if it was good things or bad things or what, but
Okay.
I mean, all the ones that come to mind are, yeah, good at math, bad drivers, all these things you hear. But I want to. I want to see if there's anything about my results that would surprise me. That would be kind of interesting, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's, why not? I mean, there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with doing that. I think I did one. I was back in grad school when I was just first learning what these were, and I don't actually remember what my hidden bias was. I know I have it. I mean,
Yeah.
I think the problem is when people, like, for instance, my daughter is African American, she's adopted, and people think just because you're white and you have a black daughter that you don't have like prejudice. But of
Right.
course, everybody has it. I mean, and it's if I'm willing to admit it, I find it frustrating. I have neighbors here, like where I live. You definitely, I mean, people don't really want to talk about these issues, and it's a very big faux pas. They want to talk about like the PTA and like the deer in the neighborhood that are eating the flowers and all
Right.
that kind of stuff. But I don't want to talk about that. I actually don't care about any of that stuff. I want to talk about the things that I'm interested in, that I study, and those things are not socially polite things to talk about a lot of times. And I have a huge stake in it now with my daughter. And people will say, well, they'll say things like, "Oh, I don't think you should make a big deal about it." I'm like, the school that she's going to go to is 2% black. Like, I have to be aware of it. Like,
Hmm.
when I meet with my son's teacher, I'm like, our daughter's black. We care about black culture. I hope that you'll do some coverage of that in class. I like preemptively, sort of bring it up because I don't want people glossing over it. It's a big part of our lives. I don't like it when people make it seem like, oh, I don't notice she's black. I'm like, really? Because she's like super dark skinned, her hair is braided. I mean, yes, you do. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, why can't you just say that you do? It's not,
Yeah, I mean, at least say I noticed, but I don't care. I mean, like at
yeah,
least then we won't know you're lying.
you might not care now when she's 2, but when she's 13 and she goes into a store, she might get followed around because
Uh-huh.
that's how society is. I mean, that's just factual. I mean,
Yeah.
and if she was a boy, I mean, I cannot tell you how many African American people come up to me and tell me I'm lucky that I got a girl. It's so sad. I mean, I'm just like, yeah, because they're so scared for their sons
Wow.
and how people view them. I know it's talk about awkward. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, lucky me. Like, I don't have to deal with what you have,
Mm.
So I'm very in touch with like the consciousness. I really want to be aware of how they feel and what they're going through. And I feel like that's the least I can do now with our family. But I think if more people cared, it would be really like right now there's this huge controversy over a black football player who won't stand for
Oh,
the
yep.
Star Spangled Banner. It's like there was so much like angst about that, and it's like, what about like all the horrible things that are happening in the black community? Why do you care about the football? I mean, it's so stupid,
Yeah, and yeah, that's an interesting one too. That's Colin Kaepernick, but now
Yep.
a bunch of other people are following suit, and I haven't been watching it real closely. I mean,
In high school and college, yeah,
oh, I didn't even know they were doing it at the lower levels like that.
yeah,
But
yeah,
it's funny to me. It's ironic, actually, since we're already talking about politics in general. The thing that frustrates me the most about politics and just the whole conversation around it is how people just like the Constitution never comes up. It's so
right,
frustrating to me because
exactly,
you go, you know what? It's like that old saying that the First Amendment is not there to protect popular speech, right? So
right,
if you disagree with Colin Kaepernick, that's cool. You can stand up and put your hand on your heart and you can wish that he would, and maybe he'll change his mind later or whatever. But the whole idea is that he has freedom of speech, right? And
right.
if he wants to demonstrate or whatever, if that's his right.
I
And,
know.
and
And I
so,
think that, but you know what? That ties back to, I mean, the way I grew up, I'm white and I'm Jewish. I'm from Philadelphia. And we have these things, I don't know if you had them, but in Philadelphia, we had magnet schools. And so I used to take, starting in 5th grade, and I always say, this is how I became a sociologist. Starting in 5th grade, I took the bus, the L, and the subway into the city. It took me an hour and a half to get to school. And it was in the middle of the crack epidemic in Philadelphia. This is in the late 80s.
and I'm sorry, but
And
sorry to interrupt, but you said a magnet school. Like, what's the definition there?
yeah, so what a magnet is basically, and it's controversial, but the idea is kids who test as, however you want to measure this, as gifted and talented, usually meaning in the top 5% for math and reading on their test scores, are eligible to apply to go to a school that cluster. It's basically creaming the top from all the schools.
Okay.
And so it's a school that's all kids like this. And it's controversial because then you're kind of debraining the school, and then you're also all the local schools, and you're also it clusters, of course, because who scores high by class and race. And so obviously, like, I can just give you an example. Like last night, I went to a meeting for gifted kids in our school district, which was crazy annoying, and almost everybody there was Indian. And I was
Okay.
like, this is interesting. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like Indian people are not more gifted than everyone else, but like it's who wants their kids to be in these programs, obviously, is disproportionately Indian. And they're like taking notes and all this stuff. I was there for like 5 minutes and I left. So there's this desire to get your kids into these programs because the argument is not only the instruction they get, but the peer effects of being with other high achievers, which is true. There are peer effects of that, is beneficial. And so anyway, so I went to a school like that from 5th all the way through 12th grade. And I took public transportation there, and I really feel like leaving my white neighborhood and getting on the train and seeing the racial distribution changing all the way through my journey made me hyper aware of race. I mean, people used to call me racial when I was in college because I would always talk about race. I was just always interested in it.
Yeah.
And it's so obvious that that's such a big part of our society, but you don't see it if you're in a segregated world. But if, like, I was exposed to this other world. But what I was going to say is, in 5th grade, my best friend's name was Carmela, and she was Jehovah's Witness. And she wasn't allowed to celebrate birthdays, Halloween. She wasn't allowed to come to my house. She wasn't allowed to do sleepovers. And in the assembly, she was not allowed to pledge. She sat for the pledge. And they just explained to us that some people's religion doesn't let them pledge. And I was in 5th grade, and I could accept that. It's sad. I mean,
Yeah.
sad is it that a 5th grader understands that? You know what I mean? And and then you have these grown people that can't understand that if you don't want to do it, you don't have to.
Yeah, I start wondering, I guess something that interests me, like you're interested in race and sociology, something that does that for me is the motivations of the press and different political parties. And I like to think when something's going crazy in the news, why?
Right.
Obviously it strikes a nerve with the general public, or some of them.
Right.
Like people like you and I are like, oh my God, why am I even listening to this? I mean,
I know.
I avoid most of the news, but I do want to know kind of what's going on, keep my finger on the pulse a bit. But I haven't given the NFL thing a ton of thought, but right now in America, there's more talk about race and racism than any time I can remember. Other than maybe back, like you mentioned, the Rodney King riots and that part of
well, it's the social media because now people can do it.
Right. And so it gets me wondering, what is going on? I mean, because the news, obviously, sensational is good. Sensational equals ratings and advertiser money and all that kind of stuff. I think also right now, the more that race is brought up, some people might think the more that's going to help Hillary Clinton, because if you're going to talk about race and racism, Donald Trump's got the bullseye on him, not her, right? And I actually saw something you posted on Facebook that she's got plenty of supporters too that have biases and prejudices. But anyway, so I'm always wondering how much of it is driven by the fact that people actually want to talk about it, and how much of it is driven by some other agenda.
I totally agree with you. I just feel, I mean, the media is nauseating, but I also don't believe, like, with so many capitalists and media as a form of this, I don't believe everything is about giving people what they're demanding. I don't believe that. And I also don't believe that's their job. Their job is supposed to be, helping shape the conversation a little bit, and not just, clickbait and like people will click on this. And I mean, so many of like, for instance, even some of the nomad stuff, I've tried to follow some of it in the media, the digital nomad stuff, but it's such, I mean, so much of it is garbage, like
Yeah.
these really short listicles and top 5 places and this, that, and the other thing. And I think too, it's funny that you mentioned this because I do feel kind of guilty or self-conscious about talking about anything about like domestic affairs in the United States or about like things like the shootings and stuff like that with nomads, because I do feel like they're trying to disengage from this world, and my engagement in it makes me seem kind of provincial because I'm still living in the rat race where I'm participating in these conversations and things like that. But of course, I also kind of feel like I have no choice. I mean, this is the life I live, and I am here. And I do believe I'm an agent for social change in my teaching. That's what I do. I hope that people leave my class with a better understanding of the way the world works and the things about our world that are, who benefits from what in our
Right.
universe. But I have to admit, when I was in Bali, I think I was there maybe just a couple of nights when 2 of these shootings happened, and my Facebook feed was just filled with like people I knew who were Black, who were just in crisis, emotional crisis, and honestly, I think traumatized by images and videos and fear for their children getting a driver's license and getting pulled over and something happening. And I mean, if they honestly do feel like there's like modern day lynchings happening. And it's terrifying for them. And I remember I was like crying in like my villa in Ubud one night, like just thinking about what my friends were going through. And I was thinking like, why am on the other hand, I was kind of like mad at myself for checking Facebook or looking at the news, because I'm like, why am I engaging with this? I'm supposed to be like in Bali, and I had this image of how I was supposed to experience Bali, which was to cut myself off from everything back home. And not care. But then I also felt like a traitor to everybody if I didn't at least express support for what my friends were going through back home.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Do you ever feel like that? Like where you're like kind of feel like it's like a faux pas to engage with current affairs back home?
I sort of go through phases. I guess I don't feel like it's a faux pas, but I go through phases where I'm paying attention and times when I'm paying much less attention. And part of me feels like I sort of think back a few generations and wonder, did my grandma's parents care what was going on in Ireland after they lived in New York?
Right.
I mean, because right now, I don't follow what's going on in Ireland at all, right? So why would my great grandparents care once they were in America? So do I care what's going on in America now that I'm in Thailand? And of course, my mom's still there and my friends are there, like you when you're thinking about your friends. Yeah, it's a tricky
Except
one.
for the grandparents, for them, it was a more recent arrival. And then we know from all those newspapers, like newspapers in foreign languages, like immigrant newspapers and stuff, that they did follow it.
Right.
There's this great book. It's old now, but I love it. It's called I think it's called like A Slice of the American Pie, and it just explains how like white immigrant assimilation to the U.S. is so different from the experience. Like you can't compare it to slavery or refugee experiences. But they talk about like the assimilation process and what kinds of immigrants assimilated better than others and what factors came into play. And I remember my grandparents, I'm Jewish. My grandparents were born in the U.S., but they spoke Yiddish. They read like Yiddish joke books, and they were completely, they spoke Yiddish at home. And by the way, they said many, many racist things in Yiddish at home. There's a word in Yiddish for black called schwarze. It's like
it's
it just
German.
means black. And German and Yiddish sound similar. And my grandparents would say all this stuff, and then they called my babysitter the schwarze. That's what they used to call her with the New York accent, And I was just like, don't call her that, And they're like, it just means black. I'm like, no, it doesn't. Not the way you're saying.
Yeah.
Not when you say, I hope the schwarze doesn't steal my rings, or I hope the schwarze doesn't have her boyfriend over, or whatever kinds of things they're saying,
Right.
So it's not like I was raised with people who were like you know, civil rights activists, like the stereotypical idea of like Jewish intellectuals or anything like that. So I'm very aware of being in a household where people talk like that, and I'm, I think it's really interesting the path. I mean, I think my grandparents they've never met my daughter, but I think they wouldn't be surprised if they saw her, because I think they would think I was trying to prove a point by adopting her.
Okay. Nice. Right.
They wouldn't understand that I just didn't fill out the race part of the form and I just got whoever I got. But
Oh,
I
that's actually what happened?
yeah, so when I adopted her, so we, I've actually, this is kind of interesting. So my son was born from IVF, and my husband and I had, and this is a common thing among professional women, that infertility happens if you delay getting married and you delay having children for your career. There are consequences for that. And we did that, and there were consequences. And we had my son after several miscarriages, and then we had more miscarriages after that. And I applied for an adoption, and on the adoption forms, they ask you all kinds of information about like it's called like an openness test. And they ask you all kinds of things about drugs and alcohol and mental illness and prison and rape and prostitution and things like that. And one of the big questions they ask is about race. And they ask you all different combinations of race that you're willing to take, like half Asian, half white, half black, half white, I think it goes down to even quarter, if you want to, do it that way. But we just didn't answer any of those, and we left that
Oh,
blank.
okay.
And so that's how we got her.
Interesting.
And so, yeah.
Do you know who the comedian Mitch Hedberg is?
Yeah, he died, right?
Yeah, he did. He died really
Yeah.
young. He's probably my favorite comedian. I mean, the stuff that's out there is hilarious. I don't know.
Yeah.
I love his style, but
It was like absurdist. It was like
yes.
absurdist, non sequitur.
Yeah, and the way that he delivered it was just great. He had a really unique style. But he was talking about how he said something like, I don't think I'm racist. I have no problem with black people, man. And then he's like, but you got to draw the line somewhere. He's like, fuck purple people, man. It's just that form you're talking about kind of reminds me, like, how many possible combinations on there. That form could be like 100 pages long, right?
Yeah, well, the form was, I mean, at least dozens of pages long with all the options. I mean, the thing is, it really, this is the thing. I mean, it really forces you. I mean, it's one thing for me to study these things from afar and to talk about my views in a very abstract way.
Okay.
Like one of the things I teach in class, for instance, is like twin studies versus adoption studies and crime. And the studies do show that kids are more similar in their criminal histories to their biological parent than to their adoptive parents. And so what that would lead me to believe is like, oh, well, I don't know if I should adopt someone whose father has been incarcerated,
Right.
But I mean, I really do believe that so much of who we are is social. And I think that, like, I always tell my students this, I believe that, yes, biology plays a very important role, but as we say, it's like biology loads the gun, environment pulls the trigger. And there, my daughter and my son, whoever, my family's not perfect. I have people in my family who have had mental illness, suicide, drugs, how people view that when you're a white Jewish person versus a black child being put up for adoption is two different things. I challenge anyone to look in their background and not find biological aspects that are not something you would want to check off on a form. And then this is my beef too with even the online dating world. Like people you can't just like compile data on someone and choose them. That's not how it works. I mean, but yeah, I mean, so they have all this information on there, but I really believe that it's mostly environment. And I think that most children, if they were put in a nurturing environment, could flourish. I really do believe that. And I'm definitely putting my money where my mouth is because I really see that now. I mean, I just see like, her world would have been really different. And if she was in the environment she would have been in. And my son would be really different if he was born, in an orphanage in Romania,
Yeah.
So
You're reminding me of this book I'm listening to right now. Shoot, if I can remember the title, Mindset, and it's by Carol Dweck. Have you heard of this book? Uh,
no, I
the
haven't.
the basic idea is she's talking about, she calls it the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. And
Mm.
this concept, or a real similar one, was in some other book I think it was Quiet, The Power of Introverts, if you've
Oh
come across.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and so basically, when you're a teacher or a parent and you're talking to kids about their schoolwork or their athletic performance or whatever it is, if you emphasize, you know,
That they tried hard.
yes, versus you're
Yeah.
gifted or you're smart or whatever. It's like, wow, you really stuck with that one. You really worked hard on
Right.
that. Great work. And actually, when you were talking about the magnet school and how you get this peer effect, she was talking about how, sometimes you take the kid that was top of the class in high school and then they go to a really good university and they have this like crisis of like ego because they're no
Right.
longer easily breezing past everybody else in class, and it can
Totally.
actually like depress people and things. But
Right. Oh,
but
absolutely.
that's more
But
likely to
I think our
happen.
society, I mean, I know there's tons of research on this that shows that people love to believe, like my husband studies creativity a lot, and and people love to believe that outstanding people who are super successful have like this super intelligence and talent that they
Right.
were God given, born with it, and it's a fixed trait, and you can't teach it. You can't teach art, you can't teach writing, you can't teach singing, you can't teach dancing, you can't teach this, you can't teach that. but but it's kind of it's a really easy way to get off, because then you can just justify not being creative.
Right.
I mean, I really do believe everybody is creative. And I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about being around children, because when you're around children, you see, like my children have unbridled creativity. It's all day, all the time, inspired, excited, driven, project oriented. I mean, it's amazing. And you know what happens? It just gets hammered out of you. Or your family doesn't nurture it. Like my kids watch very minimal TV. I'm sure if they could, they would watch TV 24 hours a day and the iPad 24 hours a day, but I don't allow that. And so then they just drive me crazy with all their projects. I mean, it's
Yeah.
nuts. Our house is crazy. I mean, my son will wake up at 7 a.m. and he's like, I'm inspired. I need cardboard, gold leaf. Um, I'm looking for masking tape. He's just like
Yeah.
telling me all these like materials he needs.
How old
And
is
I'm
he?
like, oh my God. Like when I was his age, I just sat like and watched Bugs Bunny until school started, you know?
Um, you know, and like with your son, and what her point was, this Carol Dweck in this
Oh
book.
yeah, go ahead. I'm
Oh no,
sorry.
it's
Yeah.
all right. It's good because basically, if so, say your son builds whatever it is he's trying to build, you give him all the supplies, and then it comes out and he's not happy with it, and
Right.
you say something like, "Well, maybe you're just not that creative."
Right.
That's the kind of thing that fosters this fixed mindset. And so the kids that, you still might graduate top of your class, but you kind of think you're doing it on talent because you have
Right.
this innate, you're just smart. But then you
Right.
get to Harvard or whatever, and you're no longer easily top of the class. And so instead of thinking I just need to work harder, you think, "Oh my God, I'm not smart enough. And
Right.
I'm gonna let down my family and blah blah blah."
And
Where
you
the
see that, I mean, that is, people do these things with, I mean, you see it with gender, and you see it all the time. People like give your kids these attributes at a really young age. Yesterday, Rosabelle climbed out of her crib, and I was telling my neighbor, I was like, I think I might want to get her in gymnastics. She's really good at like maneuvering. She's like a little ninja.
Mhm.
She's like, oh no, she's long and lanky. She should be in track. I'm like, for Christ's sake, she's 2 freaking years old.
Yeah,
Like, is it done? Is it over?
right.
Like, yeah, but people want to give like these holistic, and people have looked like analyzed this. I mean, it goes by race too. That like, for instance, Serena and Venus Williams, everyone wants to attribute their tennis playing to just raw physical talent, and not to like strategy and skills and learning over time and
Yep.
practicing and determination, and that people are more likely to attribute those things, for instance, to white athletes, and to think black athletes have just like raw physical talent.
Mm.
But yeah, I completely agree with that. I think focusing on trying and, evolving, and also not making everything about like, you know, what your talent is has to determine what you should be. I mean, there are people who, like you said, who are really good at sociology. I went to grad school with someone who I was really intimidated by. She got perfect scores on her GREs, and she had like a meltdown and dropped out.
Oh, yeah.
And so just because you're good at something, and I tell my students this all the time, just because you're good at something and people have told you like, you should be a lawyer, you should be this, or you should be, doesn't mean you should do it.
Right.
If you don't like it, then don't do it. I have students all the time that I'm like, quit. Like,
Yeah.
if you don't want to be here, quit. It's like 7 years, grad school. I mean, and they're like, well, I've already got all this done except for my dissertation. I'm like, okay, your dissertation is like a book. So if you don't like this, why work on your dissertation for 3 years? I mean, for what? Then you're going to have a PhD in sociology. What are you going to do with it? I mean, then you're going to go in the job market, and then you're going to get a job in West Virginia in the middle of nowhere.
It's that sunk cost that we talked about last time, right?
Absolutely.
If you actually get your PhD, you feel like you have to stay in this field. It's even worse,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've gone through this myself. I think I'm not sure if I told you this, but I actually no, I didn't, because I was just promoted in the spring to full professor, and it was kind of interesting because I made this New Year's resolution this year to my husband and I went to New York. We go to New York every year. We went to New York and we stayed at a hotel, and we got these journals about planning our sabbatical, because I'm on a 1 year sabbatical.
Yeah.
So I'm not teaching for a year. I'm working on a book project, and my husband is off. He's a business professor from January till September. And one of the things I noticed was, I said, whenever I achieve something, I really don't celebrate it. I just move on to the next project that I need to worry about. And I give myself things to worry about, or I focus on meeting everyone else's needs all the time. And he said, yeah. And I said, I noticed my birthday or when my book came out, we didn't do anything. And he said, yeah. And I said, I want to try to celebrate things when they happen. And then I got full professor. We, of course, didn't do anything. And I told him about my trip, this idea. I wanted to go to Bali. didn't travel because I was in graduate school from age 23 to 30. And then from 30 to 36, I was getting tenure. And then from 36 to 43, I've been having babies, or however I had them, I'm writing 2 books. And so, he bought the ticket to Bali. He's just you're doing this, you're going. I went and I left without the kids and without him. I'd never been to another country by myself. I've certainly never been to Asia by myself.
Yeah.
And it is somewhat freakish for people to travel alone. And I even had a friend from Australia, from high school, who lives in Australia, who's like, I'll meet up with you. I'm so close. And I'm like, you know what? I really don't want to meet up with people from high school when I'm in Bali. I want to, that's not what I want to get out of my trip,
Yeah.
So I bought that book, The Artist's Way, and my husband and I have been working our way through it. It has these creativity. It's supposed to get you unblocked from your creativity. And in sociology, so when you do a study in sociology, you have to complete this piece of bureaucracy called an IRB. That's called Institutional Review Board documentation, meaning you have to apply for permission to do the study. And it's you have to fill out all this paperwork explaining how you're not going to abuse people, and it's based on basically it's based on the hard sciences, the syphilis.
Yep.
Things that happened with African Americans, and shocking people, and all the unethical things that happened in psychology and stuff like that 50 years ago, 30 years ago. So anyway, so I do all the paperwork, but I do it for 3 different studies because I'm so panicked about starting a 6-year project again. And I went to Bali, and one of the projects was on digital nomads in Bali. And it was really enlightening for me to sort of confront this idea, I'm going to do a project. Most of my research is on neighborhoods in the United States and inequality. Okay. I have 2 papers on the creative class, on intellectual workers. One is on how they use coffee shops, and one is on where they want to move when they graduate from college. So it's not totally off, the subject, but it's not what I've been mostly known for in my career.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the book said, and talk about synchronicity, because she talks about this in the book, but one of the things the book said is, do you feel like you just have to keep doing whatever your resume says? And I was like, yes, I do. I
Yep.
Like, I was just like, I feel like this is who I am. I have to keep doing this or I'm going to look fragmented, like I'm having some kind of nervous breakdown. It's not even like I'm doing some, I have like a very good publisher interested now. And he said he wants the project. We have a proposal. I mean, we did the IRB. It's very conventional in a lot of ways, but I just felt guilty because I wasn't doing like my big social justice project on like African Americans and the police or something. And sure enough, I go to Seattle for my annual conference, the American Sociological Association conference, and I'm at like a dinner with like 6 guys who are also academics, and everyone's going around talking about what they're working on and sort of bragging or whatever. And they're all in New York, and of course I'm in West Virginia. And someone says, "Oh, well, what are you working on?" And I said, "Oh, well, actually I was just, I told them, I honestly felt embarrassed to say this. I was like, I was actually just in Bali," which makes me sound like I'm frivolous, I feel like. And then, "Well, who took care of your kids?" "My husband did."
Right.
Which is fine. And then like, "Oh, Bali. What kind of research are you doing in Bali?" That just sounds like an excuse to go on vacation, and then you just like you're like, "Oh, well, I'm just gonna do a study while I'm in Bali," and I was like, okay, and I just it was they go, I guess Skyping with a bunch of like rich people in Bali is a lot easier than going into the trenches and neighborhoods and dealing with problems there. Someone actually said something like of that nature.
How well do you know these guys?
Well, I only really see them once a year, and then I see them like, of course on Facebook, and then when they ask me to do favors for them, like review books for journals and things like that. But I was like, I hear you. I was like, you want me to like keep doing the same thing over and over again. I got it. Message received. Like, I got, and I just, and then like, so I was at the gym the other day, and I'm not going to lie, like I did feel like, it's like my inner critic. Like I felt like all my insecurities about doing this kind of project, which is like so different from what I've been doing, came to the surface, And I was at the gym and I was listening to, I know this is really corny and embarrassing, but I was listening to, who's the woman that wrote Elizabeth Gilbert's podcast, which is called Magic Lessons. And she had on an author, I think his name was Neil Gaiman. I don't actually read his work, but he was talking about how when you have an audience for a book, what do they want? They want you to write the same thing again. I mean, that's your audience, like Elizabeth Gilbert's people want her to write Eat, Pray, Love again. But Eat, Pray, Love is over. I mean, there can't be I'm sure she would love to write Eat, Pray, Love again, but she just can't, And so, and then he likened it to this idea of like some people are dolphins and they'll do a trick, and if you give them a fish, they'll do the same exact trick again. But other people are, what did he call them? Otters. And they'll take the fish, but they can't do the same trick again. Yeah. And I thought that was really inspiring because I very much feel like that. I feel like there are like these external expectations put on, I think a lot of people, but definitely in academia, you're supposed to have a research program. And even though I feel like mine is extremely narrow, even with this included, it's urban sociology, it's places, it has to be like hyper specific and narrow. So like your specialization is like super fine. And
that's like the opposite of the Renaissance man, that concept.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, I don't know. And maybe that works great for certain people and certain personalities, but like the most important thing to me, one of them is variety. I get bored, and I felt the same way. I can identify with what you're saying because I remember when I went from real estate to owning a flea market. To a lot of people, that probably just seemed like, I don't know, I flaked out or I quit or I couldn't handle it or who knows what they thought, right? But like, this sounds fun. It sounds like an interesting change. And, at the time, real estate was okay. It paid the bills, but I didn't really think it was fun. And I went from, doing the same thing that I'd been doing for 10 years, which, I had all the numbers of the forms memorized and I knew what I was doing, but it wasn't interesting to me anymore. All of a sudden I'm learning about how to weigh and value gold and different kinds of like antique bicycles. And it was super interesting. So,
yeah. And it's like, you have to even ask, like, I know for me, a lot of what I do, I mean, there's a reason people sometimes don't want to talk about like the kinds of things I do. It's depressing. I mean, it's
Yeah.
what I study. It's not, it's not looking at shiny objects. It's looking at some of the ugliest parts of our society and humanity. And I, even myself, I sometimes it's hard to get in front of the screen and sit there and look at the blank page and revisit these things that I've been studying. Honestly, I've been a sociology major since I was 18. So
Wow. Yeah.
I I only took 1 year off, and in the year between college and grad school, I worked in the sociology department, and I was also a counselor, a crisis intervention counselor. I got trained to be a crisis intervention counselor, so I answered calls with people who were in crisis. And that wasn't, I mean, it was fulfilling to help people, but it was also really, I mean, I'll never forget like the voices of the things that I've heard. I mean, so yeah, I said that to my husband. I was like, I want to do something that's more fun. Like I want to do something like right now, listening to, so far we've conducted, I want to say 24 interviews at this point. And, at night we're listening to them before bed. We listen to the interviews together and we like pause it and we're like, oh my God, did you hear that? Oh my God, did you hear this one? Oh, write that down. Like, that's amazing. That's so interesting, And even if we don't agree with some of the things that people say, we think it's interesting that they see it that way.
Sure. Yeah.
And for me, it's so interesting because I've never had an entrepreneurial mindset, except I think you could argue writing books by yourself. And in some ways, I kind of feel like I was the original digital nomad in the sense I always knew I couldn't really do a 9-to-5 job. And this is like the closest thing at the time, pre-internet.
I totally agree with that. I always, when I think about the digital nomad thing, the closest comparison I always thought of before the internet was writers like Ernest Hemingway and people, people that would go hang out in like North Africa and do drugs and write books. And, you hear all these interesting stories.
In fact, it's so funny you say that because my training, this is another example, like in the artist's way, she has you write. There are a lot of exercises, and one of the first ones I did this in Bali was you're supposed to write about your inner critic, and you're supposed to talk about people who are enemies of your creative self-worth, right? And it's kind of hard because in sociology, you're trained to be a scientist, and creativity is not a big part of what we talk about, if at all. But when I was thinking about this, like the enemies of my creative self-worth, and one of the things I came across was like mentors. So I came from a very quantitative program at Ohio State, and I basically did a lot of statistics, and my master's thesis and my dissertation were very sophisticated quantitative analyses of people's asset holdings and the census tracts they moved to. And so the idea that now I'm actually talking to human beings and like taping it and transcribing it and analyzing for meaning is it's a huge departure from the way I was trained, and I think it's been so fulfilling for me. I mean, so much of what when I was in grad school, when I was getting tenure, one of the first things you're supposed to do when you go into an academic job, you have to get tenure, right? And you have to get a certain number of publications, okay? And the first thing you try to do is you try to publish off your dissertation. But the problem is when you start your tenure track job, you've already been working on your dissertation for 3 years. So you're sick of it. But you have to keep getting, you have to try to get, like, I made a goal of getting 3 publications, which I did, but I was so sick of it at that point. People would, I had this really amazing data set, and people would contact me saying, do you still have that data set? I want to work with you. And I'm like, I can't work out of that data set anymore. I'm done. Mm-hmm. And they're like, you're kidding me, right? I'm like, no, I'm done with that. I cannot mine that anymore. I'm sick of it, And so I had this idea. This is actually and this is how so many things are in the Bali thing as well. I had a kernel of idea. I did an exercise with class where I had them look at their census tract. That's the neighborhood they live in, and compare it to the county. Okay. And then I had them look at it in 1 decade and another decade for change. So they did 2 comparisons, the change over time in a 10-year period, and then a comparison to the county. And to do the example, I looked up my hometown neighborhood, and my hometown neighborhood had gone from like 90% white to 40% white in 10 years.
Wow.
I know. And I thought that was a bit extreme. So I looked it up. I just happened to have data where I could look up all the census tracts in Philadelphia, by race. Like there are different ways you can sort and do change scores. And I found that it was one of 3 neighborhoods in the whole city that had changed that much, in the whole county, I mean. And so I was like, oh my God, like this is like an extreme case of white flight. And so I drove there, and that was like a 7-hour drive. And I just started talking to people. And I came with a set of narratives that are in place. I thought what would happen is I'd see some white people that were upset that black people moved in. And I thought I would see black people that were happy to be in a better neighborhood. Okay, that seems reasonable.
Yep.
No, the first person I talked to was a black veteran with one eye who worked for the post office, who was sweeping outside of his house. He had a big American flag. And the first thing he told me was that the neighborhood's going down and he had to pull his daughter out of the local school. I was like, okay, so a black resident is dissatisfied with living here. Okay. So I just had to take that in. Then I see a white old lady outside, and I ask her how she likes being there. She's like, oh, I love it. She's like, these people will do anything for you. And she used the word these people. They're cops, they're firemen, they're EMTs, they work hard, they help me, they change my light bulb. I was in the hospital and someone sent their kid over and helped me with laundry. I could never stay here if it weren't for them. I was like, what?
Yeah, not exactly what you're expecting, right?
Yeah. I went home and I did the IRB to get permission to do interviews. And I remember I told one of my mentors about this. And she's like, Rachel, you can't do that. You don't have tenure yet. You need to get tenure. This is a post-tenure project. And I was like, right. But I mean, all these old people are going to die within 10 years. I mean, I'm not going to be able to interview them. And this is happening now. Change is happening now.
And I don't get it. Why would that be a post-tenure project? Why would she say that?
Because it's a new project. It's qualitative. It involves trips and talking to people. And,
So does that make it harder? Like you're not qualified yet, or what? I don't get it.
No, I should just crunch. I have a data set that's in my office. I should just crunch it and churn some things out to get the sticks and not start something that might not be fruitful for a while.
Got it.
But the problem was I was hating doing my work.
Yeah.
So my husband told me, he's like, Rachel, you need to just go there once a month and get the interviews done for your sanity. Just do the interviews and don't be focused on the publication part of it. This is just something you're doing and you don't know what's going to come of it. And so we did that. Every month we would drive to Philadelphia and I would do interviews, and I would basically ignore my husband, and he would just run around the city while I did interviews for 3 days straight, and then I would drive all the way back to West Virginia and work. And that became my book that won an International Book Award. I was the second woman to ever win that award.
Wow.
I mean, that book is, and that was something that someone who I really respected, that enemy of my creative self-worth, really told me not to do. And so it's really interesting just thinking about who you listen to, and it's kind of changed the way I mentor as well. I mean, I do discourage students from doing outrageous projects that I think will harm them in a way, not get them a job. But I am trying to be more open to things that are not the typical project necessarily,
So that lady who was telling you shouldn't do it, I mean, do you think that she had your best interest in mind? She was just trying to help you, or?
I do think that she thought that,
Right.
but she, that's her life. And she's doing her life and I'm doing my life. And, I always knew we were different. I had a sign of it before that, which helped me have the courage not to trust her, which was I met my husband when I was 26 at a bar. And he was a year ahead of me in graduate school, and he's 6 years older than I am. And he got a job at a liberal arts college, which means it was not a research intensive school, which when you come from Ohio State, that's a huge failure to everybody, is that if you're going to a teaching school, right?
Okay.
And so I was limiting my job search to the region around where he had his job. And she was very, very upset about this. Everybody, all of my mentors, except for one, ironically, an old white male was the most supportive. But, she just said like, well, you have more publications, so you should go on the national job market and he can just follow you and get like some kind of other job or something. And I was like, no, that's not like how you have a relationship. Rob's not like a piece of garbage that's just going to follow me around wherever I go, like,
Yeah.
and I'm like, that's like how you see it, but like, that's not how I see it. I'm not like looking at it like an economist in pure economic terms, it's like it's a living being, a relationship, and sure enough, I mean, Rob has tons of publications now, but, he's doing this project with me and then he's amazing.
Yeah, and he's also the one that encouraged you to do the book that got the award.
Yes,
Yeah.
and he's doing an amazing project right now. He's also had this huge. He's doing a project now where he's interviewing curators at art museums, and it's fascinating. But it's interesting how people they want you to just do something that's very in a mold that's very similar to what has been done in the past, and that they can be a critic. And the fun thing about doing that exercise, like you can even look back. Some people don't want to look back in their lives, but I can even like think about, you can think about people who, I don't know, things. Everyone has like a voice in their head that tells them, like she calls them blurts. The author, Julia Cameron, she says like we have this voice in our head that says like, I'm going to fail for sure. It just like it will pop up, or
Yep.
like your best work is behind you, or like you're not productive enough, or you can't do this because you have kids now and you'll never be able to do a qualitative project. Like I heard, I heard a rumor that a man in my department said like after I had my kids, he said something like, I've peaked now because I can't do this work again. And it's like, I obviously it bothered me. I remember, someone told me, a gossip went around the office, and I was just like, wow. And of course that plays into my fear that that's true, that I can't be a good mother and do something, a big, large scale project, but I'm doing it. I mean, it's happening.
Right.
We just had a meeting with Oxford University Press, and they want the project. Hopefully a contract will be forthcoming.
The
So,
Digital Nomad Project?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. God, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I know you get going and I want to let you go, but
Yeah, go. I'm sorry.
you said something earlier that's almost exactly what I tell myself when, like, my version of that lady that told you not to do that project would probably be the one that came to my mind was my grandpa when I dropped out of college. And
Right.
every time I talked to him, he asked me when I was going back. And every time I told him never, I'm not,
Right.
I'm done. And I know he was just trying to like look out for me and get me to do what he thought was best. But I thought almost exactly what you said, which is like, Grandpa, if you like college that much, why don't you go? I didn't say that, but that's what I was thinking. It's like, this is my life. And if it turns out it's a huge mistake, contrary to what people say, I can go to college later. The college will still be there. But that's not what I'm doing.
I told you this. I mean, so like in that Julia Cameron book, I hate to keep talking about it, but it's a big part of my life right now, that I told you this. I don't know if you remember this, but she had a quote in the book from Carl Jung. And the quote was, nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment and especially on their children than the unlived life of the parent.
Yeah.
And it's so true. I mean, I even do think like being a college professor is partly, my parents didn't go to college, and my mom was, that was a very big, she had me very young and married very young and divorced very young. And I do think a very big part of my life choices have been about pleasing her, making her proud, not wanting to cause her stress as a single parent, wanting to make sure she's okay, not wanting to be a source of worry. And it may be partly being a girl. I think it's definitely part of having parents who got divorced and stuff like that. But it's, and that's not all bad, and I try to remember, I think who I hate to quote this, but what's that guy's name who's like, oh my God, I think I've mentally blocked his name because I have an aversion to him. Tony Robbins.
Yeah.
Is that his name, or Robinson?
Yeah.
Is it Robbins?
Tony Robbins. Yeah.
Yeah, but he kind of said like you should thank people in your life who've been hard on you because that's why you are the way you are, And like my mom had her things, and I'm resilient because of it, And And, you have to try to look at those things as pluses. Your grandfather said that to you, but, there were probably other aspects of who he was that helped you in some way. And,
Yeah. Well,
um,
and I knew, like at the time, honestly, it didn't stress me out when he would say that because I just
yeah,
knew that that was kind of the world he came from.
right,
He
exactly.
he had a college education and he was some sort of professor. I should know, but I think he taught computer programming and something. But you know, most of my aunts and uncles, he had a big family, lots of kids, and most,
Yeah,
they went to places like Cornell and Columbia and became lawyers and things like that. And
right.
that was kind of, I'm sure he was proud of that. And a couple generations before him, our family, we were like farmers, trying to
Right.
grow stuff, potatoes or whatever in New York. And so that was a big step forward, which I understand. So he was just trying to help me out, which is fine, but just wasn't
And I think as
wasn't
a
my
parent,
life.
yeah, I think one of the things that I'm really struggling with too is like when you have kids, so you see these things. I mean, it really changes your mindset because all the things that you're critical of your family, once you're a parent, as much as you don't want to do it, you are doing that
Yeah.
again. Like I can't imagine my kids not going to college. That's just like horrifying to me. Um, and I think that like you start to look at your family with a little bit more empathy because you're experiencing what they're experiencing. You're worried. I mean, the thing is, as a parent, like the biggest thing that you want to do is protect your children
Yep.
from hurt and from trouble and from bad things happening. And so you find yourself doing things that you don't really agree with intellectually. Like my son had an assignment. He had to bring a paper bag into school with 5 things that represent his interests. Okay. And some of them we did silly things like he brought a marshmallow in because he just loves marshmallows. But then he wanted to bring in this pink feather boa. And I said, "What's that for?" And he said, "It represents theater." And I said, I was like, "Okay, Roscoe," I was like, "if you bring that in, some kids are going to make fun of you." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, you know how some people, even though pink is just a color, you know that in our society, some people associate pink with girls. And then they're going to call you names sometimes. And we've already talked about this, a couple times already." And I said, "Now you can bring that in. I'm just saying that that might happen." And I said, "Is there something else you could bring in that represents theater, like a mask or something?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he went and got a mask and it was fine. I think he would have rather brought in the boa. But I would never have imagined I would say that to him.
Hmm.
I mean, I really felt very conflicted about it. But I want to insulate him from like that moment where he pulls that out and like nobody will talk to him at recess or
Yeah.
everyone will call him gay or it's really hard. I mean, you really do. I do understand the struggle of like parents in a new way now, and I'm much more forgiving than I was when I was younger. You know,
Yeah.
some learning is truly experiential. I mean, as much as I'm an academic, the motherhood thing is like it's no joke. I mean, it's like a life sentence of like seeing all these things way up close.
Right. There's that thing where they say, like, when you're a little kid, you think your parents know everything. And then when you're a teenager, you think they know nothing. And then when you're a parent, you think they did a pretty good job. And you're trying to do as good a job as they did.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, my mom had me when she was 21, and my mom was not like the kind of person. I mean, it's definitely interesting seeing now. Like, I play with my kids, I sit with them, I cuddle them. I'm very like, kissing on them and always touching, and we dance and we listen to music and all that. And my mom wasn't like that. But then to be fair, I mean, she couldn't. She was just working.
Hmm.
And it's sad,
The one that
It's
my mom
sad.
and I laugh about now, which is funny to me that she can laugh about it, is when I was a baby, like a toddler and younger, my mom made all my food. She grew stuff in the garden, she smashed it up, do whatever you do to make the baby food, grew carrots, grew peas. I mean, I had the best, straight out of the
Wow.
yard food. Blackberries, she'd go pick all, we had apple trees in the yard and all that. And then fast forward, my parents split up, and she was a teacher, and so she was working, she was busy, and it totally went to the polar opposite, which is, do you guys have Schwann's where you are, the truck with frozen food that drives around?
No.
Okay, well, maybe it's a West Coast thing.
Or maybe we do and I don't know it. Yeah.
So it's this big, it's kind of like a giant version of like an ice cream truck. So it's all frozen stuff in the back. And these guys run around, and they're kind of like, I think they work on commission. It's like a franchise maybe. Anyway, you see the truck driving down your street, and you go running outside and you flag them down, and they know which houses to hit anyway. And they have like frozen pizzas and popsicles, and it's all just pretty. I mean, some of it's okay, but a lot of it's kind of junk food. And I practically lived off of these frozen pizzas. I remember all my friends used to come over because they knew I had them, and we just eat these little frozen pizzas. And my mom laughs about that, like, I guess looking back on it, that probably wasn't the best move, but it got food in your face. We got to school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, is it more important for the house to be clean than for her to spend time with you, or is it more important, like,
exactly.
And who knows what other things you learned? I mean, one thing I really learned from my mom working all the time, I never considered not working. Like my neighbors, when I was pregnant, my neighbors would say to me, I live with mostly on my block stay-at-home moms, and they would say, "Are you going to go back to work?" And I was like, I mean, it's like, I don't work at CVS. I'm a college. Yes, I'm going back to work. I mean, it's not like this is my career. I mean, it's my whole identity is so tied up in what I do. It's never been an option to like not go. And I was never really not working. I mean, in the fourth week after my son was born, I submitted the manuscript for White Flight, Black Flight.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's not to say that that's always good or it's for everyone, but I think a lot of times, like, it's interesting listening to the digital nomads. I mean, I think a huge generational difference is like a lot of upper class white women feel like finding a passion or finding a calling or a vocation is optional. And I don't think that most men of my generation feel they have that luxury. And so they have a lot of jobs that they work in insurance and things like that, and banking or whatever. And because my mom always hated her job, and still, the number one narrative of my childhood is that my mom hates her job, and that we don't have money. Those are the two things.
Yeah.
I think I was driven to find a job that this is why I could never do what you guys do. I cannot be an entrepreneur. It is not in my constitution to not have a paycheck coming in. I don't have that. And then secondly, so I wanted security, and that's another reason why I'm really into being married. But two, I wanted a job that I am interested in. And I am really lucky because I have a lot of autonomy in my job. And if I want to drop the Nomad Project and study, I don't know, I mean, anything, I can.
That really is pretty awesome. I mean,
I can. You name the subject and I can study it.
A lot of people, that's what they do with their spare time. They watch documentaries, they listen to podcasts or whatever, but that's your whole career. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, when I was going into Philadelphia, and even with the Nomad thing, I mean, when I was in Bali, I was there alone. I had my bag, I had my bikinis, I had my novels and my journal and my pens. What was I doing? I mean, Rob was so disappointed because of how much work I did when I was there. I went to co-working spaces. I interviewed people. I went to Skillshares. I at nighttime in my like what here would look like PJs, but there look like clothing. I would like be in a hot, sweaty co-working space with like a lizard walking by and the fan interrupting the sound quality. On a kind of sticky upholstery, drinking, the typical coconut, picture or whatever, but talking to someone who was much younger than me, who was like 26 years old and had quit her job and had a lot of hard things happen and was trying to build something for herself. And have to admit I had a bias at first of like, oh my God, these entitled white people. It's like, oh yeah, you're just going to travel. You're just going to drop everything. You know, who paid for this? And I had a lot of that going into it. And I still, but I have to say, I mean, it is inspiring to talk to people who at this young age are trying to carve something out for themselves that will make them feel fulfilled. And it's not just, and this is like one of the big things in our book, you know, there are several things we want to talk about, but what I really find from my interviews is as much as people talk about travel, that's not the dominant reason they do this. It really isn't. If you really listen to what they're saying, quantitatively and qualitatively, the amount they talk about it and what they're actually saying, it's really about, so the crux of our book is basically these 2 points. One is that there's this narrative of the creative class, right? That there are people who are in knowledge fields, graphic designers. I mean, honestly, the creative class includes any intellectual worker, really. But this idea is like cities will thrive if we can attract this talented group of people, right? Seattle is attracting this talented group of the creative class. We need to build them cafes and clubs and fancy restaurants, and we need to have marijuana be legal. We need to have all the things they like so they'll come here and make our city amazing, right? Because they're so creative. We need to have gay people. We need to have diversity. Usually that just means gay people, but so that's the argument. But the thing, and so what's interesting to me about that is look at when I talk to these people, what they describe to me is that, yeah, they live in London, they live in Vancouver, and guess what? They wake up, they go to work and work like animals, and they have nothing left. Their creativity, it turns out, is not infinite. They spend it all, and then emotionally and physically and spiritually, all of it is spent. Then they take the subway home or the tube or whatever it is, and then they go home and they buy some stuff and watch Netflix and get drunk. And so that creativity is all being fueled. It's at work, and it's not really like this thing that's being actualized outside of the organization, even if you're a graphic designer, even if you're a so-called artsy creative class person. So I want to sort of address this idea of like the creative class as being creative in these cities. What are they really doing there? Why is it not fulfilling to them to move to London and have that job? Why is that not enough? And then the second part of it is, so they leave, right? And there's this idea, I mean, the word nomad, digital nomad, traveling. You get this image of like these people who are moving from place to place, and they're placeless, and they're really into their internet community, and they have a really busy travel itinerary, and they're going, they don't care. They're trying to break attachments to people and places. But what's the first thing they do? They go to a hub. Yep. And they build and make community in the hub. And the hub isn't optional. They need the hub. They need it for work. They need it for emotional support. They need it for social support. And so it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. It's this study in contradictions. And that's what I'm, intellectually interested in these people's narratives. And there's such a pattern. I think for my husband, who's never listened to qualitative interviews back before, he's like, oh my God, this is crazy. They're saying identical things. I'm like, that's what happens. People are saying identical things. I mean, there are lots of things they don't agree on, but there are some very big things that they agree on.
Yeah, we talked about this for quite a while. You've got the people in London, the people in Seattle or whatever that are going for that probably high-paying job. A lot of the people here, it's pretty common that they used to have some kind of job like that.
Right.
I think you've got some percentage of the people in London and Seattle who are seriously considering making that leap. And they might have some money in savings. They might not. Like the degree of risk they're taking can differ. Right. But right. I mean, they're all taking some amount of risk. That the worst case scenario is it doesn't work out. Whatever money they have goes away. Some of them get clients on the side while they're still working a job, and then they get enough clientele that they know they're okay. But
Right, they're consulting.
yeah, yeah,
Most people I know, I mean, they're not launching a business and making money off of it. They still are keeping consulting jobs,
yeah.
which is important because it's important for people to understand that they're not so privileged that they can just live off savings.
Right. And of course, you've got the whole spectrum. Some people just quit. They've got whatever they've got in savings. They don't have any money really coming in yet, and they just make that
Right,
leap of faith. And then other
right,
people are way more methodical about it. And the second they leave their town, they've already got plenty to live on, and
right.
everything in between. I even saw one guy who he managed to let his boss let him go remote with the same exact job that he used to do back in Washington.
Hmm.
But then that job eventually, while he was over in Thailand, that job dried up for whatever reason, and then he was in a pickle. But it
Yeah,
was funny because it was the same spot he would have been in if that happened to him when he was back in the U.S. He's like, oh
right,
God, now I don't have any money coming in, which is not that unusual back in the U.S. either. So
right,
yeah,
right.
it's
Yeah, and I think it's important to sort of look at like those calculations and like how people I mean, one of the really interesting parts to me is, and what I think Rob has said, I think he thinks I have an advantage in the interviewing versus when he's present, is one thing that I've really in migration research and urban sociology and geography, they focus a lot on mobility decisions as being composed of both push and pull factors.
mhm,
And so, like, of course, the pull factor for Bali or Chiang Mai even is like the climate and that it's cheap. Um, Seem to be the two things that most people choose those locations for, and then also that there's like a co-working
right,
space and internet and stuff.
yep,
But the push factors are just as interesting because the push factors have several domains. There is usually a very personal push factor. Like a relationship or an existential thing or a mental illness or drinking, or there's usually something really personal going on, usually. And then there's also like the very big thing that people can't, there's a work part of it, whether you've been laid off or whether your work is just not fulfilling. But I really think the most encompassing thing is like lifestyle. People don't want to live this way. And I'm really, what I find really interesting about digital nomads is, so when I try to talk about the project here, by the way, this project is very threatening to people who I talk to here, even people who are in your world, who are like, do a lot of stuff online or who do consulting in digital things, because they're doing it from here. They own a house, they have a
mhm,
car, they have a dog, things like that. And it's very threatening to them to say that they could not do those things and also not be near their family and to hear about these people's lifestyles. But what I find is that like here, the version, when you look up co-working space in Pittsburgh, this is what you find. There are basically a couple of things you find. One is uh, a place that a company is using as their office space, basically. Um, so they're eliminating some kind of cost of having an office, and they have like a certain percentage of workers at that space. And so that space, and because Pittsburgh is a Rust Belt area, they have all this space, and they're just trying to find. It's
right,
not here because it needs to be here. It's here as a real estate thing, as a way to like use the space.
yep,
It's not here because there's something going on. You know what I mean? And then the second thing you see is like a lot of times at these co-working spaces, I'm like, okay, I just Googled the other day, coffee shop freelancer. Okay. And it was like top 5 coffee shops to go to if you're a freelancer. So I took my laptop. I don't need internet because I'm writing, but I went to this coffee shop. It has like the coffee. I mean, it would probably drive you absolutely crazy, but it's $4 because it's like special fancy coffee or
sure,
whatever. I don't know what it's called, like pour over cold brew, Japanese, I don't know, whatever. And I get there, it's gorgeous. Like it's like in Bali, like the whole area is open. It's wood, it's modern, it's beautiful. There are all different kinds of seating and things like that. There's like 2 people in there.
hmm,
And you
wow,
know why? Because everyone's at work.
yeah,
Because in reality, in our culture, when people talk about flexible working, what they really mean is nothing like what you guys are doing. It's very minimal flexibility. It's like log on at home, 1 day a week and do some of your work in your underwear.
Yeah.
But it's not truly like what you're describing, where it's like you determine, you can get up whenever you want to, and it's based on the output. If you get your work done, fine, go take a martial arts class. I don't care. It's not like that. It's still very much focused on the hours you're putting in, FaceTime, and then there are little tiny tweaks to it that are called flexibility. And that's the problem. And I really wonder if like the next generation, the millennials, younger people who have been raised with the internet, I really wonder if they're going to accept this. I mean, I think that this is like the way things are going to be moving. And I think like places like where I work, where the institution is very old, and both generationally and culturally, I think that they're going to really see a very big resistance to what they're trying to impose.
Yeah, it's the world that you're in and the world that I'm in are so different. You've got like the idea of tenure to me is so bizarre and interesting and awesome for you, but just
Mhm.
it's so bizarre to me that it exists, you know? So, and maybe I don't even understand it totally right, but you're in a position where you can do almost anything short of like what physically hurt a student maybe or something, and you've got a
Well, there are
job, right?
things you can't do, like you can't obviously like having sex with students
Yeah.
and things like that. And then also just like you have to stay productive to a
Yeah.
certain level, or else they start punishing you. So they'll change your schedule around. There are all kinds of
Okay.
passive aggressive managerial things they do.
Yeah.
They change your schedule. They give you more classes. They give you a less desirable schedule that increases your face time. They'll give you more advisees. There are all kinds of very low level punishments
Hmm.
meant to alienate you and make you feel marginalized so that you'll retire and they can hire someone cheaper.
Ah,
So that's a very, that's academia. Academia, I always say it's filled with haters. I mean, it's a place where people are very focused on tearing you down. I mean, that's what critique is. And it's become worse in a way because it has become highly corporate now. There's a lot of, we actually have this thing now. I'm not joking. It sounds like a proctology thing. It's called digital measures. And it's basically like monitoring you. So you're supposed to like report like how you're spending all your time. And so they're trying to take away the autonomy.
mhm.
And make it more corporate, and they're hiring a lot of administrators. This is one of the big grievances that a lot of people like me have, is like they can't hire people like me who are qualified teachers anymore because they're spending all their money on administrators now. And so, they have less qualified teachers and more, business people having meetings, who of course resent people like me because they think I have too much free time and all that kind of stuff. Um, but the thing about tenure that's so important is that two things I think you could appreciate is one, all the political stuff, it insulates you from political things. So if I want to study fracking in West Virginia, where fracking is huge, I can. No one can stop me for political reasons because it's against the industry or it's against coal mining or
Ah, gotcha. Okay.
you know. So that's huge because that's a huge mission of academia, is the
Right.
freedom of ideas. And firing people is something that can stop that. Um, the second thing, though, is you need, and lots of people, that book Remote, which I love, they talk about this. You need time, uninterrupted time to write a book. You can't just like write it 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, meeting, lunch, colleague chatting with you about their driveway or about like some grievance they have about their life. So a sabbatical and tenure gives you time. And so you have these chunks, I don't go in Monday through Friday. I have research days. And on those research days, I have non-negotiable time that I spend with myself doing my work.
Yeah,
And that's
that whole
huge.
idea of like multitasking and these really short work chunks, I think, is a bit of a myth. And I mean, people have written books all about that. And,
Yeah.
how you need larger chunks of time for the things that are important, like hours, not 30 minutes, or, not getting interrupted by phone calls. And that's something that when I was in real estate, you're kind of supposed to be available 24/7 on your phone. And I was a little bit weird where, I would just not answer the phone if I was with people, where that was something that drives a lot of clients nuts of realtors, is when they'll be in the middle of an important conversation, their phone will ring and they'll pick it up.
Yeah.
It's like, and even when I had the flea market, I'd be talking to somebody about, a $10 piece of jewelry or something, and they could hear my phone ringing, or actually I always had it on vibrate, but they would notice it vibrating and say, "Oh, you can get that." I'm like, "No, I'm here with a real person, that."
Right. I'm being present.
Yeah.
I'm here with you. Like, let's do this,
Yeah, it's focus, and that's what voicemail is for.
Yeah. Although, I mean, it's interesting. It's like I used to feel like my students are horrible, like in class, they all have their phone. I mean, it's really detrimental what's happening to people's minds. I mean, it's pretty disturbing. And I've seen it in my lifetime because I started teaching in 2000, well, no, in 98. So I've seen this happen in real time.
Right.
And I just see how my children are so different from other kids that don't use devices. And I'm like a really big believer that they don't need that yet.
Hmm.
And now you see people my age who are like this. They're completely addicted to their phone. They have their phone out. My kids ask me for phones. Roosevelt, my daughter's 2. She asks me for a phone all the time because they see us with it, and it's changing the way they view us. And it's not good. I mean, I do think, at least in Bali when I was there, it's not as much like that. There are certain people, usually people who are newer to the nomad experience, that are like this, have their phone out and they're completely ignoring you and looking at their phone. But most of the people I met there aren't really like that. Um,
Yeah,
I
I think in general, I mean, it's really hard to sum up what the digital nomad crowd is all about, because they're so different. They're from every part of the world. They're doing all different kinds of jobs and things. But I think one of the biggest themes is just focusing on what you want to be doing and eliminating obligations and distractions. And one of the ways you do that when you're in a place like Chiang Mai is you don't need to work 24 hours a day.
Right.
You've got spare time, you have leisure time, which is funny because, over the years, like over the decades, we've automated so many more things. Like, most people used to be farmers not that long ago, and now something, I think, like 3% of the US population are farmers, or maybe it's even less, right? And you would think that people would have more and more leisure time. Like back in the 50s and 60s, they were telling people that, right? Oh yeah, and yeah, we do have standard weekends or 40-hour work weeks that are shorter maybe than theoretically 40-hour work weeks that are shorter than previous generations. But, people could work less, but they're not, a lot of them. And you get people over here who really are taking advantage of the fact that they can work 20-hour weeks or whatever, or take a week off and work 40 hours the next week and be in a place
Or
where,
some people are workaholics. Like, I've just interviewed someone that is a workaholic and he works more than he did at home. But he feels that it's of his own choosing and he's building something he wants to build.
right.
And, that's different from, from doing it for a corporation. And then, I have friends here. I just had one of my girlfriends is a vice president at a bank. And she's a web designer and design person, and she's all into color theory, and she's super artsy. She's on the board of a museum here, and they don't have kids. They're married. And I've told her about the digital nomads, but the thing is, like, it's just, if you're 50 and you're from this region and you were raised at a certain time when this was not available to you, it's pretty unfathomable to leave your aging parents. It's unfathomable to leave your house, to leave your 2 motorcycles and your 2 cars and your kayak. And I said, but you could do this. And she said, but I feel fulfilled having a visionary at the bank who I'm building something with, making his vision come true. And it's all about the process of being creative. It's not about me being an entrepreneur.
Right. And
I think that's valid. I mean, I think that's
yeah, I do too. I think you get a lot of like implied judgment. People don't even realize they're doing it. But some of the digital nomads set like looking down at anybody who would ever work for anyone, or like, someone can tell you what time you have to come to work that's inherently bad, but
Right.
some people love their job and that's
Right.
great. Keep doing it. It's cool. But
Right.
but it is a possibility. Like you said, you could do it. It doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, and that I think look, as someone that's a mother, I would love for my kids to want to be with me versus run off to Bali when I'm old. I mean, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like I'm sure that I think that's great that she wants to be with her aging parents and not leave them. And I think that that's very noble. I think it's noble for people to want to participate in what's happening in our society and be part of the community and be part of the answer and not withdraw from the social problems that are happening here. I think that that's admirable. I also, though, think that as I watch people in my community who have jobs that they don't like and don't find meaningful and get caught up in consumerism, I think, and honestly, to tell you the truth, having so many students, I mean, I've been teaching since, like I said, since 1998. I've been a professor since '03. I have a lot of students that are lost. I have a lot of students that are afraid to dream. I have a lot of students that won't even apply to a graduate program at another school. So they only apply to WVU for grad school.
Right.
I have students that think Pittsburgh is too far away. I have students that don't want to do their field work in Pittsburgh, which is an hour and a half away because they're afraid. So to come across young people who are wanting to do this, I think is really beautiful. I mean, I really do. It makes me feel very hopeful about people's willingness to try to find something that is meaningful. I don't know, I don't think I sent it to you. I sent it to my husband. But I heard on a podcast today, someone interviewed Justice Sandra Day O'Connor about what makes for happiness. And she said, oh my gosh, I have it written down, but I think she said something like finding work worth doing.
Yeah.
And I love that question. I love that answer because it gets at the trade-off part of it. Is this worth it? Is it worth spending my best waking hours to be doing this job?
Yeah, I'm thinking back to some of the jobs I was doing and that was a real question. It's like, yes, I have to pay bills, but is there another way to do that? And
and also, but I have this side of me that's the sort of crotchety grown up that says like, look, I mean, all jobs have shit work. I mean, I've definitely had my share of grad students that don't want to do some of the shit work involved in my job. And they're like, I don't want to, oh, you're just going to enter all this stuff into Excel and, showing a movie. And I'm like, what do you think this is? Do you think I spend all of my time thinking great thoughts and winning book awards? No. I mean, a lot of what I do is, menial tasks. That's part of work. I mean, it's not all exciting. It's some of it is digging ditches. I mean, and that's what it is. I mean, data analysis, I mean, in the end, you're doing recodes and you're, writing programs. I mean, and you're running them and having to fail.
Did you ever see the last lecture? Randy Pausch, he was a
Yes.
MIT professor.
Oh gosh. Yeah, because he was at Carnegie Mellon, which is in Pittsburgh.
Oh, right. Did
you
meet him ever?
No, I've never. No,
Okay.
I mean, I didn't meet him when he was alive. No.
Right. If people listening haven't checked out the last lecture, it's one of my favorites. It's actually, there's a card in the Better Me game that tells you to go watch the last lecture. And
and I meant to tell you, I have secured 2 neighbors who are going to do that with me.
So cool. I meant to ask you. I forgot. Cool. Great.
Yeah, I didn't want to just do it with Rob. So I have my neighbor who's in her 50s, and then her son who just graduated from college is going to do it with us.
Nice. And if somebody listening has no idea what we're talking about, that's
go ahead.
The Better Me board game, which is a board game I made that's it's hard to summarize, but it's a personal development board game. It brings up interesting conversations so you can get to know yourself better and reflect on things, and you can get to know the people that you're playing with in a much more like authentic and deep way. And then it also challenges you to go do nice things or, take care of things you've been procrastinating on, blah, blah, blah. So,
But it also creates, like, the thing I like about it is it creates like a safe space for you to have these kinds of conversations with people who, like when I tell people that Rob and I are doing the artist way together, they're like, oh my God, like my husband would never do this with me, and it's like, but this is something that they might do because it's a board game.
right,
You know what I
exactly.
mean?
Yep, yep. I think, part of the idea behind the game was that in the personal development thing, which include books like you're talking about, or, people watch DVDs or they're going through reading blogs and things, but they tend to do that alone mostly. And
Yeah.
I mean, what you and your husband are doing is awesome, but a lot of people just don't do it. So the board
And
game,
there's parts of it we do alone. Like I do it in the most anal retentive, uptight, type A way. And he's like, I'm not doing that for a half an hour. I'll do 10 minutes a day. I'm like,
right?
okay.
Yeah,
Like he won't allow people to bother. He's truly like, no, I'm not doing. Oh, that exercise, that's stupid. I'm not doing that one.
yep.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
the
not like.
game,
If it
I
says
mean,
I have to do it.
it almost tricks people into doing it together,
Yeah,
But then, of course, and not to talk too much about the game, but the number one rule in the game is that you can pass on any card that you want to pass on. So if for whatever reason you don't want to do it, that's totally fine, and nobody's allowed to try to pressure you into doing it or anything like that. But
right.
but Randy Pausch, the last lecture, he talked about obstacles are put there to keep the people who don't want it enough out. That's to eliminate your competition. All that grunt work you're talking about in the Excel spreadsheets and everything. It's
Right.
not all glorious and fun, but
The dissertation. I mean, all of
yeah,
it. Yeah.
and
We
that's where
always
you can
talk about
separate
this, like
yourself.
they'll sometimes like some of the issues with completion in our program is like people don't get they get the coursework done, but they can't get the thesis done. And I'm like, well, then let them drop out. And then there are people in my department who are like, usually people who are administrators that want to have our completion rate percentage be higher, and they'll say, well, can we do a non-thesis option?
Hmm.
And I'm like, no, no, like the thesis is the culmination of it. It's you doing your own project. The classes are just bullshit. I mean, they're not bullshit, but they're not, that's just like more college. I mean, the thesis is the thing that you started on your own. You have to be self-motivated. You have to create the thing and you have to follow through. And that's the thing. I mean, it's not just a hazing ritual. It's a work product. It's
Yeah.
a creation, And if you don't want to do it, fine. But you certainly are not cut out to be an academic. I mean, being an academic is all about imposing a lot of structure on your life when no one's giving it to you. I mean, I can't tell you how many publishers have told me, like, the number of times people say they're going to write a book and that they actually follow through. It's very unlikely that people are going to follow through. I mean,
bet. Yeah.
it just requires, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of like you doing it. It's you and your computer. I mean, it's not like being at a co-working space. It's lonely. I mean, it's you have to write it, So it's a very solitary thing. And,
how do you go about, because that seems like a big intimidating project, right? So on your first book, you worked with a couple co-authors, right?
right.
Okay.
So what happened was, and this is again, like talk about serendipity. There was an older professor, Kent Schwerian, who, he's an urbanist. And, this is actually really funny. I was working as an advisor. I had what's called an assistantship, meaning I didn't pay for graduate school. It was free. And I worked 20 hours a week for a stipend of money to live off of. Like, I think it was like $12,000 a year I lived off of.
Okay.
And I worked as an academic advisor 20 hours a week. And, it's a job that is kind of a low status thing in the sense that when you're a teaching assistant or a research assistant, you're not really always working 20 hours a week. You have more autonomy of when those 20 hours a week are. And it's not as gendered as being like an advisor. Advisor is a very like female kind of like advice giving, hand holding, emotional labor job. And in addition, you have to hold a certain number of hours a week. So it's more confining. And you generally are working more. And so I was doing that and I was really good at it because I already had counseling experience and I had already been an academic advisor when I was, after I took a year off of school. So they wanted me to do it a second year. And I was like, oh no, because I should be doing teaching or research. I should not be advising because that's administrative. And I should be getting experience doing things that are going to help me in the job market and publications and things like that. So I was at an event, and there was a younger male grad student who told me that he met some guys, some academics at a football game, and they were working on a book project, and he was going to be their research assistant. And I was like, how is that the case? You're like below me in the program. He's like, well, maybe you should go to, football games or something. And I was like, oh, hell no. I was like, this is bullshit. So I wrote a cover letter in my resume and I put it in their mailbox and they hired me.
Oh, wow.
I know.
Nice.
Oh, I know. And to this day, I mean, these two guys, I mean, they've done so much to change. They changed my life because Kent is the one that taught me how to do qualitative research. And that's what ended up being the Arena book. And I was 26, I think, or 25 when that happened. I was 25. So that was a huge thing that happened, and I went to every single interview with them, and we interviewed the mayor and Major League Soccer and hockey and all these elite kinds of institutions. And I just sat there with these guys and I went to every single interview. I treated it like it was my project, even though I was just an assistant.
Right.
And I did not know they were going to make me co-author. I assumed I was just working for them. And then I got the manuscript and my name was on it.
That's cool.
Oh, it was amazing.
I was curious when I was looking you up on Amazon and everything, and I saw that there were 3 authors on that book. I was, that seemed kind of unusual, but interesting.
In academia, that happens. Yeah, like in my most recent book, same thing. There were 3 of us.
Okay.
Yeah, because sometimes you'll divide up the research in different ways. Like in the last book, one of the people lived in the building, and one of the people knew how to use archival research better than I do.
Uh-huh.
And likes it more than I do.
That sounds like a smart idea. I mean, it sounds more fun. You don't have to torture yourself with stuff you don't like.
Yeah, and then the people who really know how to do it well I have respect for people's expertise. I know in the digital nomad world, there's a lot of like I can learn this myself kind of thing. But I think there is also this idea of like doing and knowing. And, you even said like, I'd prefer to have a realtor who can do the job. And, so there's that in my field as well, where it's like, I understand I really haven't done archival research. And so, let him do it. That's fine.
I mean, you could learn it, but if you don't love it and it's going to take you how long to figure that out, and why not? Yeah.
I've never been like a big history person, for whatever reason. So yeah.
I think, and that idea of you sort of having that, it's not the word you would use maybe, but like an apprenticeship, basically somebody that you can tag along with and see how they do every little thing and really immerse yourself in it. That's so effective in. Oh
God. I remember, I don't think they remember this, but, like when we got the galleys back from the book, which is like the book, like a draft of it that you have to hand edit with a pencil with using editing notation. The power, I lived in this little tiny apartment in a gay neighborhood in Columbus, and the power had gone out. And I remember I lit a candle and did it by candlelight. And I was like, I'm like Thomas Jefferson.
I was just going to say Benjamin Franklin.
Yeah, I was like, I felt so like I worked all night. I thought I was like amazing.
Yeah.
I was so energized. I was like, I am writing a book right now. I'm doing this. This is happening. Like, I am doing this. I was so excited. And that was another project that my mentor, that same woman, she was like, she's like, that's not going to result in anything. And, you can work on that, but that sounds like a really frivolous project. And shouldn't you be doing this other thing? And I was like, you're not offering me anything, So I just said yes to it. And look, I got a book out of it.
Right.
That was another example of another thing she told me not to do.
You know what I think too? This is just one of my little personal isms is I think life is a lot more like dodgeball than chess. but a lot of people
Yeah.
try to act like it's chess. Like you can plan it 5 moves ahead and all this stuff, and there's the best way and the non, optimal way to do things. But it's always changing. You don't really know, and sometimes you just got to go with it and see what happens and see what you learn, even if it doesn't work out like you hoped. And I mean, nobody
Yeah, and
knows.
it's
Nobody
about
has
that
the crystal
process
ball.
too. I mean, even if my name hadn't gotten on that book, I learned how to do qualitative research.
Right.
Like, I mean, it's kind of sad to be a sociologist that doesn't talk to people. It truly is. I mean, I mean, that's the base, the foundation for urban sociology. I forget the quote, but Robert Park said something like, he's the founder of what's called the Chicago School of Urban Sociology. And he said something like, you have to get the seat of your pants dirty. You have to go out there
Right.
and do it, and I listen to a lot of, like, one of my favorite podcasts is called Long Form, and they interview a lot of journalists and some journalists like the writing and some like reporting. And reporting is, in my world, like doing the field work. And I mean, it's stressful. I've gotten rejected by people like you because, as you mentioned, like some people, the nomad mindset can be very instrumentalist. It can be very like, what's in this for me?
Yeah.
Why would I talk to you?
Totally.
It's like, oh, well, I mean, are you going to put my name in the book in some way or promote the product? Or it's like, I mean, that's not really what this is. I mean, I might put it in there somehow. It depends on what you've said to me, because sometimes people do say things to me that I can't really say who they are at that now, because they've
Yeah.
told me very personal things and they could sue me later. So, but, like you said, like, why would they waste, and I'm not saying I lie to them, but they're like, how long is this going to take? And I'm like, 45.
Yeah.
But I know it won't take 45 minutes. I
Right.
mean, it's just impossible. I mean,
That's the other thing too, is that whole, always having to get something out of every little interaction. Another thing I try to, like, what I just believe is that when you just put good people together, good things happen. You might not know exactly how or what, or, it might be some collaboration 10 years from now, or who knows, I mean,
yeah.
it's just, I don't know. Again, it's more like dodgeball than chess. Like
Yeah, I mean,
you do have to guard your time, but
I think it's good that you know that. I mean, I think it's something that I really struggle with, and a lot of people struggle with. I mean, you think like, I'm going to go to college, then I'm going to, meet someone, I'm going to get married, I'm going to have kids, and I'm going to get tenure, and everything's going to be in this order. I mean, there's an entire literature about how people who do things in order have better outcomes than people who do them out of order, in terms of like family structure stuff, like getting married after having a child or something. But the thing is, it's such a hard lesson to learn. But when you think like, oh, okay, I'm going to wait till I'm been married this many years to have children. And then it's like, oh, really? Like, you think you're going to just like, oh, you think you're just going to, not have kids all this time, and then when you want to, you're going to have intercourse and have a child. Nope. Like, it's kind of like, you really learn. It's like, it's not going to be exactly what even doctors tell you or what people tell you. Oh, you're only 34. Actually, 34, your eggs are pretty freaking old at 34. You're really not meant to have a baby in your 30s. You're meant to do it in your like early 20s biologically. I mean, so it's just an ugly little truth. I have to actually keep my mouth shut a lot of times when I talk to digital nomads about all that stuff, because I don't want to scare the crap out of them and give them the reality check of their lives. But because I think so many young women are so delusional about what's possible for them. And, it's sad, but a lot of things have to happen a lot earlier than our society is structured for them to happen.
And I should throw in a disclaimer too, because this is another thing I believe, is that, certain people are great role models for certain things,
Exactly.
but no one person is your role model for everything, right?
Exactly.
Like if you want to talk about family planning, I'm not the guy to talk to.
No.
That's not me. If you want to know how to like get a nice apartment in Chiang Mai and work online, talk to me, But I'm 35, no kids. Who knows if I'll ever have.
Yeah, but that's why it's important for, I think, especially, it's really hard for professional women. I think it's hard to find someone who, like, what do I want? I mean, I want balance. And so finding someone who's going to tell me to just publish or perish is not going to make me happy. So I need to find a mentor who, it's a unicorn, obviously, but someone who has the life that I want to have, not just the publication record I want to have,
Right. And
there were people
I just want to
when I was at Ohio State who used to sleep in their office.
Ooh,
I mean,
yeah. I want to check in with you on time though. I know you
Oh
have.
yeah, I have to go. I do.
Okay, I think I made you late already, didn't I?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to drive there, so I'll be all right. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, cool. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. It's always, I mean, again, we probably could have gone 4 hours again if we didn't have something coming up, but it was cool.
No problem.
I appreciate you coming on and sharing with us. And for sure, keep me posted how things are going with the book. I know it's not like an overnight process, but
No, but can I tell you the name of it
yeah,
as of
yeah.
now? Okay. I'm opening. It's called Digital Nomads: Location Independence, Community, and Creativity.
Awesome.
And the pitch is Digital Nomads: Location Independence, Community, and Creativity is a sociology business book that follows digital nomads, a subculture of creative workers who seek freedom from the constraints of their conventional lives and who strive for a lifestyle of location independence, remote work, and travel. Instead, and see, here's my but, instead, they have created a place-based community in Bali among expatriates who share the values and have the time, energy, means, will, and social organization to live out the dream of truly being creative.
That's
And
really,
so the pitch is why do people in so-called creative professions leave their lives behind and fly 8,000 miles away to Asia only to spend time in a co-working space with other expatriates?
right.
you know, and then we just kind of say, in the digital era, why would people still need a place-based community to work, socialize, find meaning in their lives? And we're trying to sort of tie this sort of like your world is a very sort of hell, desk in paradise theme that you see on the internet all the time, people showing their office of the day
Yep.
and all of that. But what I really want to send home the message is it's not really that frivolous. It's about people really wanting work-life balance, and not in the way that people at my job call it, like harried women that want to spend time with their kids. Not that, but work-life balance in a real holistic way, meaning creativity, freedom. And also, honestly, it's been really surprising, but people just rejecting the values and lifestyles of their home communities, including mine.
Hmm.
A lot of my values, honestly, like not really caring about getting married or having kids. And then that, this idea of location independent, which means to me that you're severing place-based ties, but in actuality, that's not really what's happening.
Yeah, the digital nomad term, a lot of us prefer other
Cringe.
terms. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
I'm not always on the move. I've been in Chiang Mai for getting close to 3 years now, and I chose, Chiang Mai out of anywhere in the world because of the community of other people here that I can learn from and relate to. And so I did want a community for sure. And I travel more than, my friends back home do, but
No, but I love that quote that you said. Rob and I highlighted it where you said, in my opinion, people who travel a whole lot can't get as much work done.
yeah, most people I know would agree with that. And we talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I like, I really want to sort of get at this idea of creating supportive geographic hubs in specific cities and how people nurture community in physical spaces despite the reputation for not doing that. I think that that's something that's going to be pretty surprising to people who hear that word on the Huffington Post in a listicle.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Listicles.
Listicles,
Yeah.
yeah.
Hey, so I know I already said I'm making you late once, so I
Yeah.
should let you go. But thank you very
Yes,
much,
thank you.
and keep us posted. And also, if is there anything you could use from our community? Like, are there any ideas or input that you want?
Well, the main thing is, I mean, I'm still sampling, and so if there are people who have been in Bali as a digital nomad, and I understand that there are other hubs, but just for the sake of since I'm focused on places and cities, I'm focusing on Bali right now.
Okay.
And it's not to say, I mean, we have talked about adding, we have some people from Chiang Mai that we've interviewed. But I'm trying to focus on one hub right now.
Sure.
It's just to make it more manageable. So if to the extent that you've had people who listen to this podcast or who have been a digital nomad in Bali, I'd love to interview them.
Okay. And feel free to post any request like that in our Chiang Mai Digital Nomads Facebook group, because tons of
Okay.
people come back and forth from Bali to Chiang Mai, and we've got a lot of members in there. It's really active. So you're welcome to use that group any way that it helps you.
Thank you so much. I
Yeah.
really appreciate that. I won't abuse it, I
No,
promise.
go for it anytime.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really, like I told you, I love podcasts, and I think I'm a pretty expert interviewer, and I think you do a great job, and I really, I just find you to be fun to listen to.
Thank
So,
you. And you make it easy because all I have to do is ask you a couple questions, and it's easy to interview you. It's a lot of fun.
oh, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I hope that's good. I hope I didn't talk too
No,
much.
I didn't mean it that way at all.
No.
It's interesting getting a peek into what you're doing. So thank you
Yeah, I'm
again.
excited to have someone who knows what it is. Honestly, you'd be surprised. No matter who I talk to, they don't know who it is.
Right.
Even in Northern California. I
Yep.
mean, it's just mind blowing. So it's fun to just have someone to like bounce my ideas off of who is involved in it and to like check me and make sure I'm on the right track.
Yeah.
So
Good. Well, keep in touch. Anytime you need anything, feel free.
thank you.
All right. Well, have a good day. Have fun with your interviews.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye bye.
Goodbye.
Ladies and gentlemen, grab your pen and